the March 1st Board of Supervisor meeting. All members are present. If you'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, if you'll remain standing for this moment of silence, I would like to honor Officer Wynnum. During this moment, I ask that we think about and honor the life of Wynnum, the town of Stanley police officer who was tragically killed Friday afternoon. I understand he retired from the state police in 2016 and was known by many in our community. We share this moment in sorrow for his loss and gratitude for his brave service. Please keep our first responders in your prayers. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have to adopt the agenda.
Madam Chair, I'll move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. That brings us to the school report by Superintendent Grimsley.
I guess I don't have to bring that up too far. That's sad. Okay. Greetings from your RCPS family. February was a very interesting month, to say the least, with so many inclement weather events hitting our area. Here's hoping that March weather is better. RCPS wrapped up its winter sports season with great success, with our basketball and wrestling team going on to postseason play in regional and state tournaments. Our wrestling team had 4 grapplers place 4th, 5th, and 6th in the state: Matt Sisk, Bryce Bryant, Austin Clem, and Clint Sneed, respectively. Our boys varsity basketball team made it to the Region 1B championship after winning against Riverhead 64-49 in the semifinals. This was the first postseason ranking the team had achieved in many years, but unfortunately ended with a hard loss to Alta Vista. The team earned the region runner-up title, with Grant Lillard and Mason Ramey achieving first team and second team all-district, respectively. The girls' basketball team similarly ended their season in high standing, making it to the Region 1B championship and earning the region runner-up title. Tori Atkins earned second team all-district. Our JV boys team finished as Bull Run District champions with an undefeated season at 11-0, and our girls ended as Bull Run District co-champions with only a single loss, finishing 11-1. Our Scholastic Bowl team is heading to the state tournament after being named Super Region runners-up. They also competed and placed second on the popular television show It's Academic, which is scheduled to air in June. I guess that was a spoiler alert, sorry about that. They will be competing in the state tournament on a date to be determined. Fall sports are now in session. We had to reverse and condense some seasons to be sure our kids could play. Our CPS has 3 volleyball teams, at least 2 cross-country teams, and varsity football all slated for condensed season events. We are now able to have more spectators at our outdoor events, up to 250, so we hope that you will come out and support our Rappahannock teams. Last week, RCHS celebrated National FFA Week. The Virginia FFA State Officer Team visited RCHS and provided an interactive workshop about embracing differences. The Rappahannock FFA chapter then delivered donuts, FFA cups, napkins, and pens to staff to appreciate the hard work that they are doing, as well as to raise awareness about the chapter. Last Friday, RCPS hosted State Superintendent Dr. James Lane on a special visit to the elementary school. Early in the week, I had the honor to present Rappahannock's reopening story, strategies, successes, and challenges on a special call to all division superintendents in the state of Virginia, the State Department of Education, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. Following the call, Dr. Lane requested a visit to our area and was able to see our reopening plan in action. He was so complimentary of the schools, the innovative programs we have implemented, and the community support of our mission. It was also a great opportunity to speak to him about some of our funding challenges here with the county demographics and our LCI. He completely understood the challenge, having once been a superintendent at a .8 LCI school, and said he would continue to be an advocate for equitable school funding at the state level. Our wonderful Wednesday day camp begins this Wednesday. Students and counselors are looking forward to this time of creativity, hands-on learning, socialization, games, and distance learning support. Additionally, the Headwaters After School Enrichment Program will be starting up on March 16th, offering a variety of activities, homework help, enrichment, and workshops. Contact Headwaters for more information about those activities. They have scholarships and sibling discounts available. This week is Read Across America Week, where we celebrate reading in honor of Dr. Seuss's birthday. The RCES reading specialist has planned a variety of fun activities, guest readers, and spirit days for students to enjoy, as well as to emphasize how much reading can be fun, and also to celebrate the contributions of Dr. Seuss. On March 9th, I will be presenting the superintendent's budget to the school board for consideration. Just this weekend, we received some baseline numbers finally from what has come out of the General Assembly, so we will be revamping our draft budget throughout the week for presentation at the hearing on March 9th. Thank you so much for participating in the joint meeting last month. It really is a great thing when we can work together to find creative solutions to significant community funding challenges. As always, we thank you for your support and advocacy for the youth and families of Rappahannock County. And in honor of Dr. Seuss, I will end by saying, today you are you. That is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you, and we are thankful for you. Do you have any questions for me?
What's the, we appropriated some funds for the Wonderful Wednesday program.
Yes.
Where do you stand in terms of funding of that program going forward? It seems like it's been a success. It seems like it's really drawn a lot of attention from families.
It has.
Where
yes.
does it stand currently, and what does it look like going forward in terms of timeline, and then are you sufficiently funded?
Certainly, thank you for the question. So the CARES Act county funding that was provided covered our Wednesday day camp throughout the first semester in the fall. And of course, that was utilized up. Since then, we have written a grant to the Path Foundation to continue it throughout the spring semester.
Okay.
So that will be offered and fully funded.
Thank you.
Update on the search for a new principal at the high school and any plans to see Principal Swindler off in Grant's style.
Okay, at this point, it's still very early and the position has been posted. So what will happen is, I believe just today, a principal attributes survey has gone out to different community stakeholder groups, your staff, your students, your community members, to find out what's important to them as far as attributes we're looking for. The committee will then be formed by our HR department and trained on the attributes survey, questioning how that kind of works, and anchor to look fors based on that and some things that we're looking for. Timeline, we're looking at probably not recommending another candidate until May. Timeline to give enough time for the committee to do its work and adequate time for the search. And there are lots of things in store to see Mr. Swindler off without getting into too much detail and ruining the surprise.
I did see where Delegate Weber had introduced a House bill to honor him and his 20 years of service to the school system. So I do think it would be in order for the board to send a letter of endorsement for that recognition. And, you know, if we can do it by consensus, that would be great, or by acclamation. But if you want, we can certainly do it by motion and vote.
Sure.
Thank you.
I think that kind of a record of service should be recognized, and I appreciate Delegate Weber taking it on himself to introduce that.
Absolutely.
I have a question just because of the topics of the day. And I heard Dr. Seuss, I think, is being reviewed as well. How much direction do you get from the state as to what you can and can't do? And then how do you deal with it with the students? Some believe that it shouldn't be discussed and some believe it should.
In a public school system, there is a pretty extensive review process that happens not only at the local level, but at the state level first. I know they are undergoing some review to changes in the curriculum frameworks for history and social sciences at this time. And those are open to public comment. You can go on the VDOE website and see all the proposed changes. Once the state gives us a framework, it's just a curriculum framework with basic standards that must be covered, or certain topics or certain individuals important to what the state has approved. Once we get that, it doesn't mean that everybody teaches from the same book. For instance, the locality and the school board has the ultimate authority on the materials used to teach the standards. So then the local process for like textbook adoption and supplemental resources happens at that time.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have one more question. The visit from the state superintendent meant he said he too is concerned about the LCI having had the same experience. You don't have to answer now, but I'm wondering if there's anything any of us can do, perhaps to meet with or discuss with him any specific ideas he might have. Because during our joint meeting, obviously, we saw the challenge and again, and I saw at least one letter to the editor saying, so what are you going to do about the LCI? And that's always the question. So maybe this is a new player with whom we could talk, discuss, think about together how to address the problem. So I just put that out there. If you think that it would be worthwhile for any of us to meet with him, since he brought it up, I think it would be useful.
It's a great dialogue and definitely a conversation I think we need to be having ongoing as we're planning different budgets from now into the future, looking at this situation. So I very much appreciate any support and help with the advocating for looking at LCI and other factors that may impact school funding in this county in particular, because we are very unique.
Yep.
So state level formula changes are very difficult to enact without harming other districts. So
Okay.
it's an uphill climb, but not one we're not willing to take.
It's good you at least noted the problem and was familiar with it, so
Yes,
it's a start.
absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Dr. Gramsci.
Next on the agenda, we have Director Jane Bowling Wilson coming to speak to us with regards to the Northern Piedmont Community Foundation. Would you like to come up to the mic?
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for having me and allowing Northern Piedmont Community Foundation to share a little bit of information. We are a 501c3 nonprofit community foundation, and I am thrilled that I actually have my 3 Rappahannock board members here. I'd like to introduce them now. The chair of our board is Rick Lassard. Would you stand, please? And the upcoming treasurer is David Aldrich. And Todd Summers is also on our board. They came here to make sure I didn't embarrass myself, but also as they are certainly vital to the organization. So thank you guys for coming. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. There are 800 community foundations in the United States, and they are defined by a geographic region. So our geographic region is Fauquier, Rappahannock, Culpeper, and Madison. And so we serve all 4 counties with the funding and the philanthropy that we do. I like to think of us not exactly as Robin Hood, because we don't steal anything, but it helps me keep a visual in that I always think about our organization with 2 sides. There is a, I don't know who has this.
I do.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you a nod then.
Maybe.
So the, oh yeah, and we have some moving pictures here. So the Northern Piedmont Community Foundation is a mouthful, and what I say to people is think of because constantly people will say, you're the community foundation of the Piedmont Northern. And it is a long title, but our region is Northern Piedmont, and we are a community foundation. So we are the Northern Piedmont Community Foundation. We started in 2000, and we have an all-volunteer board. We have up to 16 people on our board, and those folks are busy. Most of our board members are working, but they are also critical members in the community who know things and can share things with others about philanthropy, about community need, and about the work that the nonprofits are doing. Community foundations were started in 1916 in Cleveland, and they were set up primarily to be banks. They were set up initially because a brilliant person realized that counties, communities, cities, localities cannot accomplish everything that needs to be done. So community foundations were set up to manage funds that they then put back into the communities through grants, through scholarships, and through programs that assisted with improving the general fabric of the community. We currently manage 120 funds, and those funds are set up not by, the biggest, I think, miscalculation is that we have to be really rich to have a fund. No, you really don't. So many people set up a fund because, number one, they want their communities to stay strong, and number two, they like the idea of a legacy, that if they have relatives or if they're children, they can pass this on to their children to continue to do good work in our communities. So we are accredited by the Council of Foundations. It's started in 2003, and every 3 years we jump through thousands of hoops so that we can get this little tiny stamp of accreditation, but it does mean that we are compliant, that we follow the rules of the IRS and the National Council on Community Foundations. Everything we do is governed by the IRS. We have a full audit every year, and all of our processes have to be completely transparent. So the idea is we manage these funds, and the funds then grow, and the benefit is that we pool the investments of the individual funds. So if you come to me with a fund of $5,000 and you have a fund of $100,000, this $5,000 goes with your $100,000, and the return on investment is advantageous because those investments are pooled.
Ms. Bowling-Wilson, if you turn your back to the microphone, the people at home are probably not going to hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have a hard time. I have to sit on my hands. Okay, standing still. Can you go to the next slide, please? Just briefly, at a glance, last year, and this is last year, our year ended in June, so we've started over again in July. Our assets last year were at $15.9 million. We have grown substantially this year. We are currently at $26 million, and we will most likely in the next couple of months jump to $44 million. So that's a pretty major jump in assets, and those are, it's not that those are our assets under management. So we're currently at $26 million. We granted out last year $4.1 million. And the way those grants work, there's two different types of grants. We have 5 to 6 different kinds of funds, and those individual fund holders then recommend donations to the organizations that they want to help support in our 4 communities. We also run 5 grant programs throughout the 4 counties, and those are open to all the nonprofits to participate, and that's where the grant making happens. March 13th last year, we jumped to, and my board met over the weekend, and we were able to begin something called an emergency response fund. Today, we are at $521,800 that we have granted to our 4 communities since last March for those organizations that are experiencing hardship due to COVID-19. What has been interesting because of the COVID crisis is the fact that we network with a slew of other organizations and funders, as well as community governments. I'm working pretty closely with the town of Warrenton. We just awarded $138,000 in CARES Act funding to 19 businesses that were struggling to keep their lights on. We also just awarded $40,000 in Madison County in CARES Act funding to individuals and families who were struggling due to COVID. So we've created some interesting partnerships with town governments and with other organizations. So I think the most common question I'm asked is, why would we use a community foundation rather than a Vanguard or a Fidelity or an investment company? And it's an interesting answer. And it's not just because I work for Northern Piedmont, but the truth is, what happens in a community foundation is our job is really to know where the areas are that need the most attention. And then when we discover those areas, we try to improve that situation. So the reason, if you go to a Vanguard facility or a Fidelity to invest your legacy dollars, they don't typically know what's happening in Fauquier County or Rappahannock or Culpeper or Madison. And we pride ourselves in understanding where the needs are, who's accomplishing what, and how we can improve those situations. There is a tax benefit. I forgot to mention that when you are setting up a fund, you have a 60% you take 60% off your adjusted gross income for that fund balance that you invest with us. So you can move us forward. A little tiny bit on the Robin Hood left side of the equation, the philanthropy side. We aim for a 6.5% return on investment. Some years we are way beyond that. Other years it's a little tricky. We typically do a 3-year rolling average for that 6.5% on return on investment. Our funds are managed by 3 firms, one in Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and one in Culpeper. Our accounting firm, might sound kind of silly, but it is located, they are $1 billion community foundation who manage funds for hundreds of other nonprofits, and they manage our funds and our accounting, which helps immensely when you're talking about 20 million in funds. So we can keep going. These are the types of funds. The most flexible fund is called a donor advised fund, or a DAF. A designated fund, a field of interest fund, an organization. Organization and agency endowments are a little different than the other funds that we manage in that they are, they remain a liability for us, not an asset. And what happens is, if you're a nonprofit and you've got some funds and you want to grow those investments, then I think we have 10 agency funds. Then those funds come to us. Once those funds grow, then you can only grant back to yourself. So that it is a way for smaller nonprofits to grow their assets, and then it goes right back to the nonprofit. It's a little different. We also gave out close to $300,000 in scholarship funds last year. Scholarship funds, they're pretty exciting because what we found is, and I work with donors all the time, renewable scholarships are really fabulous, and that means you get a scholarship your first year. In the old days, we were like, okay, now go on, you can find money the next 3 years or whatever. It is not always that easy, so we encourage our donors to do renewable scholarships so that those scholarships, if you get good grades, you come back the next year and we issue another check. We have many technical trade scholarships in Rappahannock County. We have, and I hesitate to say this, but we have in the past had difficulty awarding those scholarships for kids that are going into trades or two-year schools. Jimmy Swindler knows my middle name. I know Scott Schlosser. I work with Mr. Hogan. So we work with these folks. Oftentimes, if a child is going to a two-year school or doing technical training, they either have a full Pell Grant or they think, oh, I couldn't get any money. So we work really hard to advertise that we have trade and technical scholarships. We work closely with Rapp Center for Education because he does quite a few technical programs, and if people don't have money to pay the fee, we pay the fee for those. One of the things that just came to mind is we are a local organization. So when the pandemic moved to town, and I talked to Lisa Payne Wells at Child Care and Learning Center, and she said, oh, we've got tons of parents coming to us. They can't go to work unless they have a place for their child to be. So we had already awarded some funding to CCLC. So what I did is went online to I have 10 donor funds in Rappahannock County, and I said, here's a problem, can you help? And so in a day, we raised $12,000 that I could then call Lisa and say, here's $12,000 to go to scholarships for kids who can't afford it. So there is a real advantage to being able to work local philanthropy. We work with businesses, schools, churches, all the other nonprofits, chambers, Rotaries, the Path Foundation, and Culpeper Wellness. We are a sister organization to Culpeper Wellness Foundation and the Path Foundation. We're not nearly as big as the Path Foundation, which is why our grants tend to be from $1,000 to $20,000. So there is a difference there, but it isn't really a competition. There's enough for everybody to do good work, and we work side by side in all our grant cycles. If a nonprofit is struggling and doesn't have the funds they need, I talk to folks at all the other places to see what we can find so that we can help them. These are a list of our community grants that we have. The Richard Lights Rappahannock Community Fund has been in place for many years. It typically awards just Rappahannock County nonprofits approximately anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 a year. So those folks apply, and then they go through a pretty rigorous committee evaluation, and then each year we put out anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 from the Richard Lights. The community assistance grants we award in partnership with the Path Foundation. That's a much bigger grant. That is a $250,000 grant cycle, and we're in the middle of that now. This is our fourth year to award that. It is open to Rappahannock, Culpeper, and Fauquier nonprofits, not for Madison, unfortunately. And again, the Emergency Response Fund, Rappahannock nonprofits have been really hustling to take advantage of some of that funding, and we have given out $521,000 today, so that's good. There are little things that go on that, I know I was walking in Culpeper one day and I saw something and it said, Manna Ministries, and I said, well, what is that? So in the Presbyterian Church in Culpeper, every Wednesday and Friday, they do a hot meal, and they have a hot meal, and if you need food, you just go get it. And they've done it for years, and it's just pretty fabulous what some of the things that go on behind the scenes. We also do a little campaign that's coming right up on May the 4th called Give Local Piedmont. Who knew this could turn into what it did, particularly last year? I mean, our nonprofits raised $1.2 million last year in the 4 counties. The reason, if you're still like going, why do we do this just on this day? Well, there's really 3 reasons. One is it's a day to highlight the nonprofits and the work they do and to attract new donors. You can donate $10 and you're a philanthropist, and lots of people do that. The second thing, so it highlights our nonprofits. The second reason to give on Give Local Piedmont Day is the Path Foundation gives us $100,000 and says, this is a bonus. Every group that participates gets a piece of that pie. So whatever their donations are, they will receive more through the PATH Foundation bonus. It's figured on your donations for the day. And then I raise about $25,000 to $30,000 for prizes, and those prizes go in your bucket too. So it's a great day to really sort of focus on your nonprofits, make your money worth more, and support what's going on in your communities. So I don't want to overstep my time. This is just a quick portion on the economic impact of nonprofit organizations, because we deal with philanthropy on this side, but we deal with our nonprofit organizations on the right side. So you can go ahead. So we compare this as an industry compared to other major industries. We also did this by calculating state taxes. I will let you know that most of my information is from 2018 data. So it's a little dated, but that's what I have. So as you can see, we had almost 38,000 Virginia nonprofit organizations at that time. The nonprofit organizations, churches and public schools are 501c3s, so they are part of that mix, which is one reason it's so much higher. You can go to the next. So the nonprofit sector in Virginia does employ about 233,000 people. And then the kicker is it generates over $63 billion in annual revenues. Virginians typically give 2.85% of their household income to charity. And surprisingly, they are the third largest employer in the state of Virginia. Sorry that this is so small. It was interesting when we did this. This has the asset amount, the percent of total state assets, and the income amount for our 4 counties. So when we found this information, everybody said, well, that's crazy. Madison can't have 478 million. But they do. And the reason they do is because there is a substantial endowment with Woodbury Forest School, which is located in Madison, not Orange. So that was what I found out about that. So you can go ahead. So that's my information on Northern Piedmont Community Foundation. We manage assets in the shape of funds that we then distribute to our communities through grants, scholarships, Give Local Piedmont, and community grants. Are there any questions?
I had one question. I was just curious about the source of the COVID relief money that you dispensed. How was that money collected? From what fund or funds did that money?
It's a great question. So we've been working on our planned giving and our bequest program, but we had a Fauquier resident who died about 3 years ago, and she had been a resident in Culpeper and Rappahannock. Her name was Mary Virginia O'Bannon, and she left the foundation a substantial sum of money. So when COVID came, I called my folks on the board and said, may we use $100,000 to seed this fund so that we can get this started, so that I can walk out the door Monday morning with this in place? And they said, absolutely. So we seeded it with that money. We publicized it. We've probably raised about $200,000 from corporations and other foundations gave us money, and individuals sent money. Some folks moved money. They couldn't have a fundraiser, but they had collected money from their golfers, and they wrote their golfers and said, can we give this to Northern Piedmont so they can do good work? And people jumped all over it. The PATH Foundation gave us substantial funding, as well as a couple other community foundations across the United States. So it came from a huge source.
Approximately how many businesses did?
It's in your annual report, actually.
Okay, $347,000. Was it like 100 or 200?
Oh, so we have funded. We've done 78 grants,
oh, okay.
and there are 50 nonprofits. Now the 19 that we just issued checks for in Fauquier County, those were all businesses, and they went through a different fund because it was too tricky to do that.
Good. Thank you.
Sure. Are there any other questions?
Any other questions?
I love questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good presentation.
Next item on the agenda is the speed limits on rural roads. Mr. Parrish, I think this was your request. I'll let you take over.
Yeah, was on Castleton Ford Road, I guess it is, coming off of Richmond Road, which has a speed limit of 45 miles an hour. And I realized that all these roads around Castleton are not posted, so the speed limit is technically 55 miles an hour. And I had several of the citizens in that area complain about, really fast cars. They got kids, out on the road and they're walking, and pedestrians and bikers, including me, use these roads. And so I've been hearing stories how people come flying around the corner and they're going so fast they can turn sideways in the road and all this stuff. So I just thought it would be good for VDOT to do a study and see about posting the speed limit there, because if it's not posted, it's automatically 55 miles an hour. And it's kind of ridiculous to come off a road where the speed limit is 45, which is a much better road, and to go on a narrow, windy road, and all of a sudden the speed limit is 55 miles an hour. So I just think it's something that needs to be looked at and corrected.
Mr. Nesbitt has joined us by Zoom, and I'm displaying the GIS map that's linked in board docs that shows which roads in the county are posted. And then perhaps Mr. Nesbitt can share with us how the board could go about influencing whether other roads get posted. Well, hold on one second.
Is he unmuted?
He's unmuted, but I've got an audio problem. Hold on a second, Mr. Nesbitt. Try again. Well. Mr. Nesbitt can't wait.
Just want that airplane.
I can see that he's talking, but I'm not getting audio, so I apologize.
Technology isn't perfect.
Oh, there we go. Try now, sir.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Yeah, good afternoon. Chairperson Donahue and board members, appreciate y'all having me today. Really, the question about speed limits, obviously, VDOT is responsible for establishing speed limits on various roads, and a lot of speed limits are covered by law, by statute, statutory law. I think what Mr. Parrish is referring to is if they're not posted, if it's a rural setting, typically if they're not posted, by law they're 55. And so what VDOT does is if we receive a request from the locality to review a specific section of road or a length of road, we certainly can review that road, and we look at the crash history, look at typically we'll do a speed study and check, put the tubes down and check the speed limit or the speeds that the motorists are traveling, and then just based on an engineering evaluation, we'll determine if the statutory speed is a good speed limit or if it needs to be lowered based on the prevailing speeds. a lot of times when we do a speed study, we find out that the prevailing speeds are higher than the, either the posted speed or statutory speed. So, unless there's a significant crash history, they typically wouldn't lower the speed limit where, on a road where motorists are already traveling at a higher speed. So, but we would be happy to look at any section of road that the county would like us to look at and make a determination.
So I don't think it's really necessary to do the dirt roads, because that's just by virtue of the fact that you can't go so fast on those. But the paved road coming off of Richmond Road, which I believe is Castleton Ford Road, and then when it gets to where the old Castleton store was, it turns into Castleton View Road, right. And those two, actually, I'm not sure how it does coming up from Laurel Mills, the Laurel Mills Road, but those three kind of come together, and that would be a good place to start, if possible.
Well, that, like I said, we would certainly review it. If Mr. Curry can, I guess, send us a written request with the termini, and we'll certainly put it on our list of roads to review. I said I can't make any guarantees that they'll even want to post it, but we will certainly look at it and see if the statutory speed limit is a good speed limit, or if it needs to be posted, or if it needs to be lowered for reasons of current speeds that they're traveling, or for crash histories, or the curvature of the road, things like that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for doing that.
And just my understanding is that there's a limited capacity of what they can churn through relative to studies, so I don't think we can just ask to study all paved roads in the county that aren't already posted. So I would need to have a good idea of the priority that the board is interested in.
Well, the ones I got the most complaints about were on Castleton Ford Road. But that does connect up with Castleton View, and it does come up from Laurel Mills Road. But at any rate, if you can only start with one road, let's start with Castleton Ford Road.
Okay. Thank you.
That would be fine, yes, we can do that.
Okay,
and,
thank
like Mr. Curry said, we wanted to prioritize them. We could get this one looked at, and then we others have issues, we certainly can look at those, but like I said, we're resourced thin, so we sort of have to space them out so we can take a look at them. And the gravel roads are statutory 35, and those typically aren't posted due to the fact that we don't want to encourage anyone to go faster than what the conditions are, since we all know that conditions vary on gravel roads depending on the weather and where they are in the maintenance schedule.
Okay, if we can just start with Castleton Ford Road, that'd be great.
Okay?
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, we have an update from Dr. Blauser, who is with LFCC. She's their representative and president, and she's going to give us an update on the school as well as the potential name change. Thank you, Dr. Blauser.
Madam Chairman, may I just make one request of the presenters today? I know that there may be questions from the general public as well as from this board in regards to the name change. So, are you going to hang out after your presentation so that if there's any questions, you can also address those concerns as well?
Sure, I can. I assumed I would answer questions from the board. If you want me, I wasn't sure about if I should respond to public comments or not, but if you would like me to do that, I'm happy to do.
I mean, I think that would be agreeable to most people. I know it's been a point of interest for a lot of citizens.
It's definitely a hot topic, so I think we might as
I hear
well,
that it is.
while you're here, take advantage of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so let me just say, to open up to that point, one thing that I have certainly learned being president, my goal is certainly never to upset community members. And it certainly is never in our best interest not to address concerns, because I've learned no one gets less upset by not having a chance to talk about it and ask their questions. So I really am happy to be here to be able to do that. It was next Friday was a year ago that we were all sitting around at Lord Fairfax deciding how we were going to tell students that we weren't bringing them back after spring break, that we were going to go virtual. And then we didn't bring them back until, in some cases, some of our classes, certainly in the fall. So it has been quite a year, and one in which we never thought we would be looking at our name during the midst of a pandemic. But when the state board passed that resolution, that is what all 23 colleges in Virginia were asked to do. So we responded to that. Sorry about that. And the first thing that we did in order to look at our name was we worked on creating a working group. So we created a working group that looked at a couple of areas. We looked at why we had our name to start with, how the first board selected the name. We looked at historical information about the college's namesake, what his connection was through our service region. We did an assessment of our college's brand overall. And then ultimately what the resolution asked us to do was to determine if the name was consistent with our mission and our values. So we were to make that determination. And so I have heard that there have been, and this is not the only community in which we've had questions posed to us and concerns sent to us about this board vote. So let me try to address a few of those that I've heard, and then I certainly will answer any other questions that you all might have. The first is that there seems to be the belief that the name was originally chosen as an honor to Thomas VI Lord Fairfax, his legacy and his accomplishments and his impressions of what happened in our region. And so I'll just tell you what the minutes said in terms of how the name was actually originally selected, to give you that as some background information. When the Virginia Community College system was being formed, the majority of the colleges were named after a geographic region. That was the most common reason for a name. So think Northern Virginia Community College or Blue Ridge Community College. Most of them were named in that fashion. The board, in their minutes, talked about looking for a name that would be regional, that would encompass all of both the Northern Valley and then Rappahannock and Fauquier, and they were not able to find one that either encompassed the entire region or hadn't already been taken. So then they looked at names, prominent names that could be used to name those. Stonewall Jackson was in the minutes. Of course, Lord Fairfax was in the minutes. And then John Marshall was in the minutes. Those were the three that came more to the top in their discussion. At the same time, the local planning district in the northern part of the valley had just adopted the name the Lord Fairfax Planning District. And so the minutes reflected that the Lord Fairfax Community College name would be a consistent label for the area's state-sponsored entities. But interestingly, when it went to a vote, Lord Fairfax actually only won by one vote over John Marshall. And I have no idea how the Rappahannock County member voted. They didn't take, they didn't actually do a county-by-county vote, but Lord Fairfax ended up winning by one, and they sent that recommendation to the state board. Ultimately, in the community college system, the State Board for Community Colleges is the governing body for all colleges. And they are the ones that make decisions about college names and campus names. Local boards just make recommendations to the state board. So they sent it to the state board. The state board sent it back and did not approve it. They returned it and said the board should give further consideration to the name, with their chief objection being that it would be confused with Fairfax County. So the local board discussed it again, as probably is still the case. I don't think they were too happy about Richmond telling them what their name could be or couldn't be. So they sent back Lord Fairfax again. The state board promptly sent it back and did not approve it a second time. And on the third time, a member of the board went to the state board meeting pleading their case and saying they would only use Lord Fairfax, and they did not believe it would be confused with the County of Fairfax. And so the state board finally approved it. So that's the history of how we ended up with our name. There is certainly the concern that slave ownership is the primary factor that was used to determine whether we were going to keep our name or change our name. There is, when the state board did their resolution, they were looking at certainly all of the colleges across and higher public education, high schools that have been changing their name. It was a reflection of everything that was going on in the state and across our nation in last summer with the death of George Floyd and everything else that was going on. So it was in reaction to that.
Keep them out of here.
During that time,
Excuse me.
so during that time is when they passed the resolution. What our work group looked at, we were made up of 11, there was 11 members on our work group. There were 4 historians. And when they were reviewing the namesake, the work group's task was not to determine, we've had the question, was he a good person? We had a board member ask, was he an evil person? That was not the intent of what our board looked at. What we did was used historical information to determine does he reflect our mission and does he reflect the students that we serve? And so while I know across our region, across the state, there are those who believe that anyone who has enslaved and owned people should not be honored in any way, our historians on our group believed that pre-1800 slave ownership should not be an automatic disqualifier. And I will quote one of our historians who said, "I am not justifying slavery, but removing names of individuals who lived at a time when slavery was not questioned for only that reason is a clear case of using modern ethical standards to condemn people whose crime was failing to rise above the prevailing standards of their time, which would be grossly unfair and ahistorical." And so the work group did not use that as the factor in their decision. The work group reviewed historical information, and they used principles that have been created. These are criteria that have been used by many colleges and universities across the country as an objective measure to assess names. And they ask questions like, they evaluate the time in which an individual lived. They looked at whether the offensive behavior was central to the person's life. They looked to see if the person has a direct connection to the college. And there are several factors that are used to do an objective assessment of an individual. Certainly, as you all know and has been posted and reflected, Thomas VI Lord Fairfax was an English nobleman who was the first permanent nobleman to make his home in the colonies. He hired George Washington to survey his property. He became a friend and a mentor to George Washington. He worked alongside other members of the Virginia government and was respected by them. And while he was supportive of George Washington as a person, when the General Assembly passed legislation in 1776 requiring that all freeborn male inhabitants of Virginia above the age of 16 take an oath renouncing and refusing all allegiance to George III, Thomas VI Lord Fairfax refused to take that oath for personal and financial reasons, and he remained loyal to England during the Revolutionary War. All of that is historical documentation that I'm sure many of you are aware of. I would note that one of the members of our task force and our history faculty, if you go to the Mount Vernon Online Library website, there's an article published about Lord Fairfax's relationship to George Washington, and that was written by our faculty member. He has studied Thomas VI Lord Fairfax, and he does writing about him. And he was on our work group, and he was adamantly, he was very supportive of Thomas VI Lord Fairfax. There were lots of questions about where this ends, and I certainly am not going to evaluate other names that might be, that folks think might get changed as a result of this one. What I will say, however, is that one of our historians is a a graduate of James Madison University. I have spoken to the president there. I don't think there's any consideration for changing the name of James Madison University. I don't think there's a consideration for changing the name of George Mason University, but I think our historians in our work group would not necessarily put Thomas VI Lord Fairfax in the same category in terms of contributions to our nation as we would have probably our founders. So the other question was then, why did the board vote to rename? How did that happen? And so the last part of the process was to look at the LFCC brand overall. You all may or may not be aware, but this academic year, we have celebrated our 50th anniversary, opening our doors in 1970. We had lots of wonderful in-person events planned that obviously did not take place. We are also, 2021 is when we adopt our new strategic plan, so we've been in the process of doing those types of community surveys and things to figure out our plan for our next 3 to 5 years. And so at this point, since we were evaluating names, we thought it was important that we also look at an overall brand study. So we hired a company called SIR that does brand studies across the nation for businesses and for higher education. And they conducted a research study for us. They did virtual roundtable discussions with students. They conducted one-on-one interviews with community members, and they conducted a survey of folks within our service region. And some of the key findings that they found, which might not be surprising to you all as well, 9 out of 10 participants have no idea who Thomas VI Lord Fairfax is. Those that have been a student or an employee or were affiliated with the college were extremely positive about the college. They talked about the folks that worked there, they talked about the support that the students felt, and they loved Lord Fairfax because of the mission and because of how it changed their life. When they learned about Lord Fairfax's history or the fact that he had no connection to the college, the first question that was asked was, why are we honoring him? That became the general question for those that were unaware. There was also findings, once there was an awareness of who Thomas VI Lord Fairfax, just a brief history of his contributions, the fact that he was friends with George Washington, the fact that he was a slaveholder, the fact that he lived in the 1700s, he died and he was buried in Winchester, a brief history of it. No matter what category the respondents were in, young, old, affiliated with the college, not affiliated, white, non-white, all of the respondents were more supportive of a name change. The brand study also found that there is geographical confusion for folks who live outside of the service region and who are not familiar with the college. I mentioned to you that one of the reasons that the college was named Lord Fairfax originally was because the local planning district had just taken that name. Interestingly, on May the 23rd, 2001, the Lord Fairfax Planning District voted to replace the name almost 20 years ago. They removed Lord Fairfax from their name, and their minutes said, with a more geographically identifiable description of the region. And they changed their name to the Northern Shenandoah Valley Regional Commission. And I will note 20 years ago, there was no outcry or no concern about changing a name. Things have changed, obviously, in 20 years. I had a conversation with a donor just last week about that, who was concerned about it. And he said, this is just the wrong time. Even if you have the right reasons, this is the wrong time to be changing a name. And I said, I don't know that I disagree with that, but that wasn't my call. So what we are doing is doing what we were asked to do. The study also concluded, in their words, your brand simply is not working for you. If students find you, and this is their words, if students find us, they love us. And our programs and our services rate much higher than comparable community colleges and universities that are surrounding us. But in particular, students in their 30s and younger, and students of color do not understand the name. They are confused by the reference to Lord. They think it sounds old, and they simply are not attracted to that name. Unfortunately, that is the very demographic we are trying to attract. That is our target market. And so despite the fact that many of us may not like that, that was a result of a brand study done by a third party. We also consulted with a second brand company who was working with a sister community college, and in their assessment, and again, their words, LFCC is a weak trademark that has been made strong through familiarity. People feel affinity to the college, not because of the name, Lord Fairfax, but because of the experiences that they had at the college. And while that might suggest that the name doesn't matter, they also said this poses a significant risk because you have a brand you can't defend in terms of any connection to your college or, quite frankly, to our mission. And you have a brand that's more positive when no one knows who he is. And so in the end, both branding firms concluded that from a branding standpoint and from a business perspective, the research tells us that he does not reflect the
Pardon me,
students.
Dr. Blosser. Madam Chair, a point of order. If you could just ensure that the room stays quiet, we showed the same respect toward the other presenters. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm just about at the end of this section, that what they concluded was that the research tells us that he doesn't reflect the students that we serve. It is not a name that's forward-thinking or inspirational. It is not relative to today's students, and it does not represent any commonly known geographic area, and actually creates confusion in terms of our geographic area. And so while I know I have seen posts, I understand that the belief may be that it was based solely on the fact that he was a slaveholder. I can assure you that was not the case. If that would have been the case, quite frankly, this resolution passed in July. Our first work group meeting was in August. We could have taken a vote and taken it to the board in September if that was the only factor we were going to consider, because it's not something that's debatable. He certainly was. But there were many other factors that we looked at. I would say the last two questions I think that came about that I've heard were why the public was not more aware of that discussion that was happening. And first, quite honestly, I will say there was never a purposeful attempt to hide the fact that this had been passed by the state board. Our board, the minute when it was passed, I met with the board. We came up with a plan to establish work groups. We created a public-facing website. Once we had a plan for how we were going to do it, we posted everything. I sent an email to 700 plus employees to let them know what was happening. I've done open forums every single month to our employees about this. We've updated our board. There really was no attempt to hide it. Having said that, I like to always try to go back and think about things you would do different or things you would do better. And I've thought a lot about this one since that question has come up. But I think the thing that I would most hope that you all would understand is, and I'll be frank with you, I really was not thinking at all about Thomas VI, Lord Fairfax. This was a request to look at all names on all of our buildings, on all of our classrooms. And at Lord Fairfax, we have nearly 70 of those. And so we have just recently, as an example, named Jenkins Hall in our new Luray building. We are getting ready to start construction on Hazel Hall at our Fauquier campus. We have the Salders, all these wonderful people who have been so generous to our college, who quite frankly didn't ask for their names to be looked at to determine if they were appropriate. And so what kept me up at night and what I worried about, to be 100% frank with you, was all of those folks. Because as much as I'm sure you all understand, social media can be not a very nice space at times. It can be untruths that are there, and I was very worried about these good people who are still walking around and living in our communities that might be impacted, or their business might be impacted, because someone comes up with something that maybe or maybe not, they even said 30 years ago, that could have an impact. And so I will be honest, I was not the least bit concerned about Thomas VI Lord Fairfax. But I really was concerned about these donors and these folks that have given to the college and have been so instrumental. And so I don't know what I would have done differently about that. I realize this is getting all the attention now. Thankfully, we are not changing any of our other building names. But at the time, that was where my concern was. The last thing I think that we asked was the role of board members. I did send something to Mr. Curry about looking at that. You know, once someone asks a question, you have to sort of go back and familiarize yourself a little bit with your policies and what it says. We looked at the letter that we sent when we asked for an appointment for a board member, and we looked at the letter that was sent back when Mike was named as the appointment. That is certainly always your all's purview to make those appointments. And we simply haven't been in the process or in the habit of talking to the board about decisions that were coming forward. Having said that, we don't normally make these types of votes. Normally they are about degree programs or about local auxiliary funds or that type of thing. And so one of the things that we look for in a board member, and what I want to just say on Mike's behalf, because I know there are some concerns and some perhaps requests that he not be your appointment to our board, is that none of that was done, again, it was not done with a malicious intent or with an intent to hide anything. It has simply been our process that we go through a process. We try to do it as objectively as we can. We make a decision, we vote on something, and if it's something that impacts our region, then we tell the folks that are impacted by that. That has been ours. But I would also like to tell you that I would hope, I know there are those that have expressed concern, but I would hope that you would, as a board, consider what you want in a board member to our college. And that is someone who is looking out for the students in this community. And I will share with you, and I would not share this at every single Board of Supervisors meeting, but Mike Wenger is an outstanding board member. He spends a tremendous amount of time trying to help students in this community and understand how we can better serve students in this community. He attends many of our events. And with his permission I share, he did not disclose it all to anyone, but a year ago, he set up a student emergency fund through our foundation to help students in Rappahannock County who have that, or the students, and you all know them, who one flat tire will keep them from finishing their program because they simply don't have the money to pay for that. And just recently, just a month ago, that emergency fund paid for a student here in Rappahannock County. Our foundation paid her car insurance. She had lost one of her jobs due to COVID. Her parents had been helping her. One of her parents had been impacted and had less hours, and she simply could not help with that. That was the one bill she just could not get paid, and so it was past due. We have a process where students can request emergency funds, and so she did that to our foundation. Our foundation had the fund earmarked for Rappahannock County schools, and our foundation wrote the check and paid for that bill. And so there is a lot to being a board member. And I know that there are folks that are upset about this one vote. It is one of many that our college, that our board members have done. But I would say overall, you should be very proud of everything that he has done to try to help students in this community, which is the #1 job of any board member, in my opinion. And so I will shut up and will now answer questions that you all have, or wait for public comment, or however you would like to do that.
Mr. Whitson?
Thanks very much for your presentation. There's been a lot of email traffic and social media posts about this, so I just wanted to put in perspective what I've heard. And at least wanted to mention this for my colleagues' benefit, not to put the cart before the horse, but I have some ideas of how we might be able to move forward. I guess the first thing I would note is I represent the Hampton District in the center part of the county. I've heard from 5 constituents directly with whom I talked at some length who were opposed to the name change. I heard from 2 other citizens with whom I talked at some length who were opposed to the name change, and I should say strongly opposed, angry about it, upset. And I think it's fair to say that all of these people had a very strong grasp on Virginia history, which admittedly I do not. And then I, just before the meeting, heard from 2 additional citizens who wrote with no opinion regarding the name change, but 2 citizens who expressed direct support for Mr. Wenger and the job he's doing, which you just articulated so well. And then finally, the glaring numbers, I heard from no one directly who said that they thought changing the name of Lord Fairfax Community College was a good idea. And then separately, in my conversation with Mr. Wenger, and I appreciate that he contacted me and gave me the heads up and walked through much of the same process he described, my reaction to him, perhaps oversimplified in the context of all the historical discussion that's been surrounding this pending decision, was why now? And you alluded to that during your presentation, that why now? I mean, this is a difficult time for everyone. The time doesn't seem right. And then my second response was, I've always liked the name. I thought it's a classy name. It suggests a strong institution, and we know in Rappahannock County that institution is part of a lot of our young people's lives, and has made a big difference in many young people's lives who I know personally. So my response to Mr. Wenger was not one of anger or frustration at the decision, but rather why. And frankly, I just don't get it. I don't have a better way to articulate it than it just doesn't make sense to me. And so in light of the fact that I've heard from not a single citizen who has told me directly that they support the name change, and I just put this out there just to pave the way for further discussion with my colleagues and perhaps you, how do we communicate if we as a board decide that we want to state on behalf of our citizens that in fact we do not support a change in the name of the college? What would you suggest that we do? What is the mechanism? What is the practical way we would state as a board our collective decision or a collective view that the citizens of Rappahannock County from whom we've heard, perhaps small in number, but still I think representative of a larger group, do not like the name change and do not want it to happen? How would we do that?
Sure. So our system is, so my boss is a chancellor of the Virginia Community College system. He also serves as the secretary to the state board for community colleges. And so I think the first step would be to address that concern to the chancellor. I can certainly give you that contact information, and that would then in turn be shared with the state board through their process to get that on the agenda as well, since he's the secretary to that.
And I understand that there's a meeting coming up in the not too distant future.
So the state board meets in March.
Okay.
The state board will not act. So the way that this process works, as I mentioned before, local boards have no authority over names. Local boards make recommendations to the state board. And so the recommendation will go as an information item at this point to the state board. What we will be directed to is to start the process to find a new name. That was, to be frank, we had no idea how the board was going to end up voting, so I didn't know if didn't know until February 4th we were going to need a new name or not need a new name. So the process now would be to identify a new name that ultimately has to go to the state board for final approval. So they will not approve at this meeting whether we can move forward or not. They will wait until the actual, it'll be their July meeting, when we recommend a new name, whether they will approve the new name or not.
So my question to you is there urgency if we were to send a letter or signed by the chair on our behalf, or a resolution signed by each of us stating a position that we do not support the name change? Is there urgency to issue that by a certain date so that we are heard fully
I
during
think the
this
sooner
final-
you want to do, you can do that, probably the better. It'll go in with the other recommendations. I believe it probably can still go for their March meeting. I don't know
Okay.
their exact deadline, but I think
Okay.
their meeting is generally the middle of March.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
there will not be an action item to approve a name until July,
Okay.
is when the state board will actually act on a name.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Mr. Parrish?
So I would say that I'm not a fan of change in general. It's just a personal thing that I have. And I've been keenly aware of the fact that Lord Fairfax Community College has been a big asset to Rappahannock County students. I really appreciate the fact that our students, our high school students, can go there and get college credits even before they go to college. And so I really don't care what the name is. The main thing is y'all keep doing what you're doing because it's a real asset to the county. And I will say I've known Mr. Winger since he moved to the county, and I do know that he has a lot of experience with other educational institutions in other parts of the world. And I know that aside from that, he has done a lot of other, volunteer work in the county. And so whether this is a mistake or not, I don't think in general it's a good idea for this board to chastise, our volunteers in the county because this county relies heavily on volunteers in general. And if we get the reputation of chastising our volunteers, it's going to be harder for us to get volunteers. So that's just a real general issue on that. And also, I'm concerned about the cost of rebranding in general. That if we don't have to spend that money, I understand it's pushing $300,000, is that right? If we don't have to spend that money, that would be great. I'm not sure, where that money would exactly come from, but, in reality, it comes from all of us. And so that's another concern that I have on that. So I guess that's about what's on my mind. Thank you.
Yeah, and I probably should have mentioned, that has been a concern, quite frankly, that is a concern of college presidents, the cost.
Yeah.
And so one of the areas that I do know that the system is looking at is actually privately funding that. So they've met through the Virginia Foundation so that it would maybe not be state-funded, any changes.
And the only other comment I have, this is another real general comment, is that a board of directors or a board of supervisors or whatever the board is are put in a position to make decisions, and they're not always the right decisions. That includes our board. And so, but we have to, in general, have faith. This is the way our system works in general, throughout. We have to have faith in what boards do, because generally, boards know more than the general public, and that's just another vague consideration here. So, whether or not it's our place for this board to tell your board what to do, I don't know. But I think you get the general idea that, what's looking here. And I had initially called Mr. Winger when I found out about the name change to see about, revisiting that and see about revoting. But, it's probably out of my hands, but thank you.
Mr. Frazier?
Oh, I don't have to go next, but I do have a couple questions.
Okay.
You mentioned this, what was it, that group that you called it, the working group?
Yes, it was just a work group.
Could you tell me the makeup of that work group?
So there were 11 members. There were 2 board members. There was 4 historians. 2 of those were current employees. 2 are external. community members. There was our Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs. There was a community member from Fauquier that was an alum. How many am I up to? I have to look at mine. I'm up to 8.
Were there foundation members on there? I mean,
Some people were 2. So one of our board members was also a donor. So not a member of the foundation board was not on this particular work group.
okay.
We had 2 work groups, just to make sure we're clear. We had 2 work groups that looked at names. This is the group that looked at the college and campus names. There was another work group which was made up of the foundation that looked at the building names and had a different group that was on that.
Well, that's good enough. I was just trying to get an idea what the general makeup was. And a second question is, when you hire a consulting firm that is a rebranding firm, did you expect any other outcome than the recommendation to rebrand?
Well, the first company that we hired was doing it for our strategic planning purposes. And we actually added the questions about the college name. They were looking at it from the standpoint of helping us to determine what our strategic planning efforts should look like. They looked at our logo, they looked at our website. They found it, which is why then when they found the information about the name, we also brought in the second firm that does more of the actual rebranding piece of it. So they weren't specifically asked about rebranding in the beginning.
If I could interject before I forget, which is the way my mind works at times, I'll go down a different rabbit trail if I don't say what I want to say at the time I want to say it. But rebranding to me is generally something different. It would be like a regional thing that is changing, maybe changing the location, maybe changing the area of service, it's like Southwest Airlines moving to Minnesota or something like that. So you would certainly, want to change the name to reflect that, you're changing your demographics to people that you serve or whatever, but you're not going to change anything, I don't guess. You're just changing the name, which at a cost of $297,000 your figures is extremely wasteful in my mind. I can't imagine that. Well, what I do, I start looking at some of the other figures on your websites that the average student curriculum for a full year is $4,900. Is that close? Mm-hmm. So if you take $297,000 and divide that by 2 years worth of curriculum, you could provide as much as 35 individuals a full ride for an associate degree program. Whereas we're going to change the name. And then again, I guess I start thinking back that, first off, another president that used to hold your position, Dr. Ski, when he first came to the area, he told me, this is the same gentleman that handed my oldest daughter her associate degree at the graduation ceremonies at Middletown, that he put on blue jeans and hung out at the 7-Eleven there in Warrenton. It's no longer 7-Eleven now, it's another business that's relocated there. And he would hang out at the Middletown 7-Eleven and try and ask both students or prospective students and the parents of those students what type of school and programs that they wanted. But yet here I read about something as important as this name change or a rebranding, if that's what you want to keep referring to it. I have to read about it a week later after it happens. Mm-hmm. And I find that hard to mesh that with some of your statements from both the video of the Zoom meeting and today. I actually think that you've been working on this a while before it was made available to you by the state, because you've said over and over again that you've always said, those are your words, I believe, almost exact. You've always said that the name is not good enough for the school. So you apparently were saying that before this past July.
No.
Then when were you saying it? If you say you always have said it, when did you start saying it?
Since we started looking at the name, What I have said since.
So then you really wanted to change this name, so y'all hired a firm that does rebranding, and that was the recommendation that they brought back, that the name is not good enough, but you already had that in your head.
No, sir, that is not accurate.
I believe you did, I'm sorry, but that's what everything I read points to.
Well, I apologize that you're reading it that way. I am here to tell you that we were not even considering a name change until that resolution was passed. You will find nothing that talks about a name. You will find nothing. There wasn't enough time in my life to even think about a name when we were trying to figure out what to do with our students and our programs during COVID. And so when that happened, we started a process and we tried to make it as objective as possible. I did not vote. I had no vote. I did not offer any opinions until the final day of the board meeting. You can ask any work group member. I offered none. So that the process could play out and that people could form their own opinions based on what they heard. And I certainly did not hire, and I'm sorry, but I find some offense to that I hired someone for the sole purpose of fulfilling something that I had already determined, when that is not the case. With all due respect, that is.
With all due respect, that's what they do.
That was not why they were
Mr.
hired.
Frazier.
That is not why they were
I've got
hired.
the floor. You repeatedly do this to me. I'm asking a question, and I'm
Mr.
trying to make
Frazier.
the point. Madam
Please.
Chairman, just wait a second.
No, I'm asking you to wait a second. Please let her speak and finish her comment before you go on with yours. Let's
Okay.
not be rude here.
So the company was hired, as I mentioned before, the company was hired to do a full brand study. It involves much more than the college name. We actually added that once they were hired because we needed them to do assessment so that we could figure out what we were going to do for our strategic planning and all of that. We asked them to add questions regarding the college name because that would give us more information rather than it being folks either offering their opinions one way or the other on whether it should or shouldn't change. So there was no intention to ever direct them in one way or the other.
If I could ask a further question then, if you had no intention of changing the name, what would have rebranding included? Since you weren't going anywhere, you weren't offering any different programs, what would have rebranding included?
What we have discovered, believe it or not, we have changed significantly since we got our name 50 years ago. When you look at where we draw students from now, we drew students primarily, there were more students coming from Page County than were coming from Fauquier County 50 years ago when we opened our doors. If you look at a heat map of just the state of Virginia, there were about 3 or 4, 5 little counties that we drew students from when we created this name. We have students from all over Virginia and many other countries. And COVID is changing the entire way we will offer education. There are many students who will continue to take classes online. So what we were looking at is how are we going to, as we come out of COVID, market ourselves for all of the online programs we have now created so that we are more accessible not only to just our service region, but to students all over the country. So we were looking at that as part of how we plan for our strategic planning process. We were looking at other things like our logo. We've heard from students, they don't understand what the little swirls are, what our logo is. So there were lots of different areas we were looking at that we would need to rebrand. At that time, we had no idea if we were rebranding around our college name or with a new college name.
It sounds like to me that as an educator, you would have realized you had an educational problem and not this name or rebranding problem.
We don't have an education problem when students come to us. We rate very high.
Well, no, but I mean, when your own polling shows that 9 out of 10 people didn't even know who Lord Fairfax was, so then you had to go on an educational program to tell them that he was a large landowner and he was, how did y'all, both you and Mr. Winger have referred to him as, he inherited his wealth and he made a lot of money charging rents. So that's the program that you went on to try and educate the people that said he didn't know, that 9 out of 10 people didn't know who he was to start with.
Well, I think probably 9 out of 10 don't know because he's not included in any history book. I mean, he's not in.
Hold on.
In terms
Please be
of,
quiet. Come on, folks.
Madam Chair.
well, in terms of, and what I mean, in terms of what our students learn, he's not included, for example, in Virginia history. He's not included in the history textbooks that our students are learning from. As I sit with my son in 11th grade right now doing U.S. history, he's not. So I'm just saying I think that's part of the reason that people don't really know who he was.
So what we have is a further dumbing down then of the students.
I don't think a name on a building is what creates history. Quite frankly, I mean, one of the comments that I received from someone who posted was that they weren't going to learn about the history of Lord Fairfax by looking at a sign in front of our building. There has to be some other way that they're learning history. I don't think that was why they don't know about him.
That's what I'm talking about. When you saw that you had a deficiency there, if you will, you didn't do anything about it. You instead saw it as an opportunity to do this rebranding, which included a name change. That's the way I read it.
I guess my question then to you would be, what would you see as his contribution that would reflect the college, that would reflect our students? What would be the message you would have us share with students about why he's important to the college or the students that we're serving?
I can answer that, but I don't think that really that we've got to this point. I think it would be kind of inappropriate for me to step on what some of the others here may have come to say, so I certainly answer that afterwards.
Mr. Fraser, do you have any questions? I'd like to let Ms. Smith go as well.
No, I can stop now, thank you.
I just wanted to get a little bit of a grasp of how this work group kind of unfolded. It said, you had mentioned that you were tasked to take this up by the state board in July of last year,
Correct.
and you all started meeting in August.
Correct.
How frequent were your meetings?
They varied every 3 weeks or so.
Just as called.
Yes.
Okay. And so you met then at least probably once in August, September, October, November, December, January.
So what we did was we met more frequently at the front end, the college name, more frequently at the front end as we were doing what we called phase 1, which was more the historical. When the brand firm had gotten to the point that they were doing their roundtable discussions and they were getting ready to do their survey, we stopped until they had their results to be able to feed to us. So there was more in the beginning and less, and then we met again in January.
So you met again in January, and you met and voted on the 4th of February.
The board vote, yes.
Yes. And then you issued a statement on the 7th of February.
That sounds about right.
And then you did press on the 10th of February.
Okay.
That Wednesday, correct? A few days later, it sounds like?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. I don't have those dates.
And then this board received notification that something was in the works around the 8th of February, I believe. And then on the 12th of February was when we were asked if we had any feedback or concerns regarding this topic. Is that the timeline as you understand it?
I honestly don't have those dates. I know that I reached out to all of the county administrators ahead of any public notification. I reached out to the superintendents of schools. I reached out to our state legislators. So there was a group that we reached out to. It was shortly after the board vote.
But no request for any sort of interaction or feedback prior to that February 4th vote?
That is cool. No public ask for that.
And no
That's correct.
communication whatsoever really about the name change in any official or unofficial way? To the members of this board?
No public, no.
That's all I have. And I would just say that, I've been involved in rebrandings organizations, and I really, my concern is that the name Ward Fairfax has a lot of really good recognition locally and actually statewide. And I know a lot of young people that have taken advantage of the 2-year programs and used it to transfer into 4-year programs very successfully. And I know you all have a very successful transfer program. And having been involved with organizations that have rebranded actually multiple times, the confusion and lack of name recognition that can come with a rebranding effort, it's a big deal. And I just hope you all are equipped to deal with that, and I really wish you would reconsider, as I think Ward Fairfax is a very well-known and well-established entity for education in this area. And I just really wish that there had been better communication on the front end. Can often avoid a lot of unpleasantness on the back end. And perhaps this is something we should all learn from.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I think Ms. Smith had a good idea or anticipating that there might be questions for Dr. Blosser from the public, but just we have other agenda items. So one suggestion I would have, and I think it fits with our normal rules, public comment, I believe, should still be directed to the board. If there are questions embedded in those comments to the board for Dr. Blosser, then since you are gracious enough to stick around and listen to what everyone has to say and the questions they might have, then perhaps you can have another opportunity and you can just keep track of the questions that are posed that you can answer, do it afterwards, after the public comment period, because otherwise I think we're gonna go off the rails a little bit.
Continue this agenda item until after the public comment period.
We're going to go to the public comment period, and then like we have in the past, if there's a question for you, we'll ask you to speak. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Public comment period. Now that this is my 3rd month, I'm trying to figure out how to organize things for public comment period. I'm going to open the public comment period. Please raise your hand when recognized. Step up to the mic and tell the board your name and voting district. Limit comments to 5 minutes today, please. Crystal will be keeping track of time so I can pay attention. The countdown timer will be broadcast on the screen. Limit comments to no more than 5 minutes. When your time is up, please don't make me be rude. I hate to do that. Go back to your seat. And please hold any reaction, respect each other, and please keep in mind we're all neighbors. Let's be civil. This time is to convey your information to the board directly. Please speak to the board only and not individuals in the audience. With that, who would like to speak? Yes, ma'am. Ms. Miller.
Damaris Miller, Hampton District. I apologize for my bronchitis. And in the interest of history, I yield my 5 minutes to Ron Maxwell and anyone else who is going to speak with him.
Thank you.
Karen Hochstetter, Flint Hill, and I yield my time to Ronald Maxwell.
Thank you.
John Kaiser of Stonewall. I would like
Could
to...
you go up to the mic, please? So you can be heard by the people on Zoom as well.
By the way, you're in Piedmont.
Is it Piedmont? Oh, thank you. I've been reading too many books. I would like to yield 4.5 minutes of my time to Ron Maxwell, but only make 1 or 2 observations. Given the obvious lack of knowledge of who Lloyd Fairfax was, it would seem to me another tack to take would be to talk to your Virginia historians, or the people who write textbooks, history books in particular, and particularly colonial history, that maybe they put this guy back into the story, because frankly, it's quite an interesting story. Yes, he was fat and had lots of money, and he stayed loyal to the British, which in a way was commendable, because it took some guts to do that at the time, and that there's a lacuna, rather than just eliminate this lacuna by declaring it out of existence. Why not rehabilitate this man and find out all the other things that he did that were admirable in that era?
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Can we wait till one person sits down, please? Thank you.
Kay Wilson, Hampton District. I must say that having lived here for 51 years, having escaped from Zimbabwe, I can tell you what it's like to have every place name and every school name changed. Everyone becomes not more familiar with the brand, but less familiar with the brand. The rest of my time, I yield to Ron Maxwell.
Thank you.
You're gonna have a lot of talking to do, Mr. Maxwell.
Yes, sir. Please come up.
Good afternoon, I'm Mark Anderson from the Piedmont District. I'm not Ron Maxwell. And I don't know what he's going to say, so if I'm saying something he wants to say, please shut me up. Two blows happened to me last week that are pertinent to this discussion, both in the state of Washington, which is where I'm from. One, my high school got canceled. The Woodrow Wilson High School of Tacoma, Washington, which has been in existence for 62 years, abruptly had its name stopped and a local school official's name inserted instead. Nobody was told about this. This was done by the school board. The cost of that, for Mr. Fraser's reference, is about $400,000. Signs, new band uniforms, new football uniforms, all the publication, everything, $400,000. Now, Woodrow Wilson, as you all know, was a Virginian, one of the 6 distinguished Virginians who was the U.S. president. Why was he canceled? He was always regarded as an historically important figure. I think he was canceled because of his private opinions on things that came to light about 100 years after he died. And if you haven't been to Wilson's boyhood home in Stanton, Virginia, you should go. It's worth the visit. He's a complex character, but I think on balance, he did more good than bad. But how it affected me, it was a blow. I had no idea this was going to happen. 50 years later, I still identify with where I went to high school, the people I knew, the teachers, and everything else. It was just instantly taken away. And I don't know if that's going to affect students who went to Lord Fairfax or not, but I suspect it will. And if you haven't had the experience of having your high school name changed, you're in for a treat. Secondly, the college I went to, the University of Washington, is having its chief statue of George Washington being attacked by the Black Student Union, and they want it canceled. And logically, it seems to me, if you're going to cancel the name of the statue, or cancel the statue itself, you should cancel the university that's affiliated with, the University of Washington. Oh, it's a state-chartered institution. You should cancel the name of the state. And every other institution that has the name Washington in it. Washington, Virginia.
Little Washington.
However you want to call it. That should go.
There's no end in sight, sir.
Now, how many other states are at risk of this? Virginia. Virginia's named for Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. That name has to go. The Carolinas, they were named for Charles I. They have to go. Georgia was named for King George II. Georgia has to go. And of course, Washington State's already gone. Now, how does that apply here in this county? We've got the Lee Highway, one of the 2 historic national highways. Lee Highway has to go. We have the Zachary Taylor Highway. Zachary Taylor, he had slaves. It doesn't matter that he won a war. It doesn't matter that he was a great president. He has to go. Francis Thornton. Francis Thornton has some kind of ties to the Fairfax family, and even though he was a pioneer and he did a lot of prominent things in this county, we can't have the Thornton Gap. We can't have the Thornton River. We can't have the Francis Thornton Valley Highway. It has to go. Now, those things I just mentioned, this board can do something about, or at least not do something about, to stop our heritage-type names from being ripped out root and branch. And I commend to you that you do that. And if you haven't read the dialogue between Ben Jones, Arthur Quinn, yeah, him, you should, because it's definitely worth your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. And as an alum of the University of Washington, and they just sent me a note to send my annual donation, I'm glad you gave me a heads up about that. So.
Who else would like to speak? Yes, sir.
Scramble District. Mike Wigger, in bringing council closer to this county, to this area, and the fact that he didn't inform the board about any of this, he needs to be fired, terminated, removed immediately. Thank you.
Thank you.
The remainder of my time to Ron Maxwell.
We're going to be here all night with Ron Maxwell. Yes, ma'am.
Nevada Estes, Hampton District. Always been a Virginian. I don't think people understand how offensive changing names of your history and, you know, that old been here, come here. I'm a kind of came back here, okay? But I've always, you know, my father was a Virginian. My mother ended up going out west, but her family came through Virginia. If you don't understand the history, and trust me, I wasn't the best in school, but you get a basic history. The one thing you do is your foundation is one of the most important things you have. When people come over the years, and I wouldn't say it's probably the last 50 years, they come and they want to undermine your heritage, your history, from your parents down to your great, 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 all the way back. They have no idea how offensive that is. Well, you know, you don't want to offend people nowadays. Stop offending us. That's all I'm saying. And I yield my time to Ron. And I'll tell you this, I don't yield to much.
Anyone else before? Yes, Mr. Deacons.
Good afternoon. Deke Deacons, Hampton District. I echo the thoughts of Mr. Ellis, Mr. Roy Ellis. I think the issue here is that an appointee usurped the authority of the board, took a position to vote. It does not represent the interests of the Rappahannock citizens. The second thing, just on a more lighter note, just for the point of clarification, one of the board members mentioned being a biker. Well, there's a difference between being a bicyclist and a biker.
Very true.
That must be the motor.
Anyone else before Mr. Maxwell comes up? Yes, sir.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell.
Pretty good, John. Pretty good.
Oh, there's one more.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell, we have one more.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the reminder.
My name's Henry Goffine, and I lived in Hampton District. I used to live in Harris Hollow, and now I live in town. First of all, what bothers me about this is that they're asking, some people here are asking you to be like a tribunal, which is not your job. You're not here to decide. If you appoint somebody and he acts in what he thinks is good faith, because politically or whatever it doesn't meet somebody else's needs or wants, I don't think you should even consider in any way, shape, or form any kind of censure for anybody. He performed his duty. If he was negligent in his duties, if he didn't show up or he did, you know, that's one thing. But if you cast what you believe is an honest vote, it's not cause for removal or whatnot, and I don't think that's your job. I'm probably one of the few people here who attended Lord Fairfax. I took courses there when I had vineyard and horticulture and stuff like that, and quite frankly, I don't care what they call it. It was a good school and all that kind of stuff. But when you say to me, you got 5 people that complained, and therefore that's why you're going. Well, you did say that.
You have to address the board.
You know, well, when some members of the board say that they got 5 votes, there are a lot of people out here, 1,500 people in Hampton District who are silent. And it doesn't mean because they're supporting the other point of view. You know, like myself, if they want to change their name, the only drawback I see is that it's going to cost a lot of money. Now, I just wanted to change the topic for a minute. It says here, I haven't been here in a while. I used to come quite regularly, but now I've decided to take a more active interest again in what's happening locally. It says, closet meeting. I don't have my glasses on. Oh, no, that's not the one I wanted to read. The one I wanted to read was matters presented by the board. Matters presented by the board. Now, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean that if somebody on the board wants to add something to the agenda, that they can do that? Or well, you know, I guess you can't answer my question. You know, can I ask the chair, or do you have a parliamentarian? I guess you do. You know, what does that term mean?
Generally, this is not a question and answer period.
Right.
The board wants me to answer.
Yep.
Please.
Explain it, go ahead.
The board has a policy on their agenda construction. That section is defined in that policy. It's essentially an opportunity for board members to bring items up to the attention of their peers, and not intended for any action at that meeting, may be subject to being on a future meeting.
So it's a way of introducing something that they want considered further down.
Correct.
Down the line.
In the spirit of transparency, so
I see. Shouldn't that be part of the agenda?
it is.
No, what they want to know, as part of, in case somebody here wants to make a comment on it, that they can.
I just wanted to
curious.
respond, Mr. Gorfine, matters presented by the board is just an informational item, it's not an action
Okay.
item. So it's not something we would take up and use
So
it to
only
ram
action
something
items go
through.
on there.
Right, it's
Okay.
just sort of an introductory period for something that we might want to work on and take more action on in the next couple of meetings.
Okay, thank you.
So I do
Thank you,
appreciate
sir.
your comments.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir, back in the corner, Robert.
Hi, Robert Yao, Piedmont District. I want to talk about two things. One, I'm going to veer off real quickly. I think we need to examine this recent executive order number 72. It's come out. I think it's unacceptable. You can't have a backyard barbecue with more than 25 people, but you can go to Busch Gardens and they can have 50% of their capacity. That's ridiculous. That's discriminating. On to this renaming aspect with LFCC. I appreciate what the person said. She came up and gave a talk. I've gained a new understanding, kind of the background of what she said. I don't agree with the end result. It's part of this, and it's going to be seen as part of this cancel culture. It's going to be erasing history. For those of you who don't know, people close to me know, I'm a reenactor. I portray the 7th Virginia Infantry Company A. It's my hat right here. We're looking at our schedule. We are Confederate. Our design is, we want to teach the history. 2 of those companies from that regiment came from right here in this county. And the way things are going, we can't put on events because if we bring the battle flag, we can't be there. That means we can't teach history. And one of my things has always been is, look, if somebody has a problem with what we do, come see us. We want to tell you about these people. Slavery was wrong, there's no doubt about that. But there's more to these people. I woke up one day in 2020 after our so-called governor decided to denounce Robert E. Lee, Thomas Jackson, and the city of Richmond did the same. Those are my heroes. When I was a kid, I didn't, of course you have, okay, is Superman your hero? Is Batman your hero? They weren't mine. These guys were. And they were better. Yes, they were imperfect. History happens. But they were good people. And he denounced them. And this is part of that continuing culture. Lord Thomas VI Fairfax, yeah, he ended up being a loyalist and stayed with the British. But again, it's part of, we've got to teach history. So that's the way we need to approach it. Not just change the name because it doesn't fit our brand, because it doesn't attract our students. And if it's not in the textbooks or if it's not in a course, you need to be teaching that. And that's the aura, that's the setting that we need to promote for our younger people. And I think I still am part of the younger people. I'm 26 years old. The other thing I wanted to bring up is there's a very disturbing parallel between what's going on right now and what happened after the October Revolution in 1917 in Russia. What did they do shortly after that? They tore statues down. They renamed cities. The city of St. Petersburg, which that's what it's called today, was renamed to Leningrad after Vladimir Lenin. The city of what is now known as Volgograd was named Stalingrad after Joseph Stalin. They denounced the Imperial Russia. They denounced the czars. They denounced their history and changed it all to suit the people that were there at that time. That's unacceptable. And if you notice, nowadays, they've changed their names. So this, I'm a big believer in that history repeats itself. And unfortunately, that's what we're going through. And what happened in Russia, I don't want to see that here, because there's a lot of people that were hurt because they believed the opposite of what the government said. Thank you very much, and whatever's left of my time, can go to Ron.
Thank you. Please hold your applause. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Maxwell, I think we're good.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Hank Garfine for not giving me his 5 minutes. Now, don't panic. I won't eat up all the time that's been given to me. 9 pages, big print, so we'll get through this in a reasonable amount of time.
You want the microphone higher?
Yeah, how can I do that?
There you go.
Oh, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to speak. I have a title for this little talk. It's called How Good We Are. Today, we're not talking about a simple boundary adjustment, as contentious as those discussions can be. Rather, we're considering something of a different order of magnitude, a boundary adjustment of the mind. In 1748, George Washington was 16 years old. Although his 2 brothers, Lawrence and Augustine, had been sent to England for a formal education, after the death of their father, there were inadequate funds for George to enjoy the same schooling abroad. George had to depend on tutoring and the guidance of others. The 2 individuals facilitating this education were his brother Lawrence and Lord Thomas Fairfax. When Fairfax migrated to Virginia, he had brought with him his library, a library that he continued to stock all during his life. It was this private library that the young Washington, where he read the books on science, surveying, on good manners, on history, biography, literature, poetry, religion, and theater. It was under the watchful eye of this learned man, this graduate of Oxford, this contributor to The Spectator, one of England's foremost literary and political journals, which is incidentally the oldest journal still in publication in the English language. He was a regular contributor to this journal. And this is where Washington read the classics and the authors of his day. It was in this library that Washington began his lifelong love of plays and the theater. It was in this library that he first read Shakespeare. When decades later, Washington had Joseph Addison's play, Cato, performed for his troops in the dead of winter at Valley Forge, it had been in Thomas Fairfax's library
that he had first discovered this play. Before public libraries, there were only private libraries. And thank God for this nation that educated men and women like Thomas Fairfax revered book learning and invested their own money in carrying the wisdom, art, and knowledge of the ages to the American frontier. In short, if Lord Thomas Fairfax should be fondly remembered for anything, it should be for the education he provided to the father of our country. Is this not the purpose and the calling of educators? To educate? To connect the youth with their past, with the learning and experiences of their ancestors and their heritage, so that they will have a firm foundation on which to build the future. Having assisted in the training of George Washington in the skills of surveying, Lord Fairfax employed him from 1748 on to survey his properties across the valley and Piedmont, including parcels right here in Rappahannock County. In his letter to the Rappahannock News on the newsstands right now, my friends, Mr. Mike Wenger asserts with solemn authority that Fairfax, quote, never had to work. He was not a scholar or a great military leader. He left no significant contributions to the political development of colonial Virginia, close quote. The truth is that Lord Thomas Fairfax did work. Yes, he did, as is well documented in the archives of the Commonwealth. He served as a county lieutenant and as a justice of the peace. Is a justice of the peace making no significant contributions? What about Judges Fleming, Fisher, Irby, Plowman, or Sienkiewicz? Are they making no significant contributions, really? And what about county lieutenants and supervisors? Are Mr. Curry, Mr. Goff, Mr. Fraser, Mr. Whitson, Ms. Donaghy, Ms. Smith, Mr. Parrish, in Mike Wenger's considerate words, making no significant contributions either? Because Thomas Fairfax had your job. Now, ladies and gentlemen, supervisors, fellow neighbors, imagine discharging your duties in the middle of a war fought right here where we live. Because while discharging his responsibilities, the maligned Lord Fairfax and his fellow Virginians were at the very center of the most momentous global conflict of their day. Two great empires, France and Great Britain, were facing each other along the entire length of the Allegheny Mountains from here in the Blue Ridge in the south to the Adirondacks in the north. Between them were arrayed a host of indigenous tribes, the Cayuga, the Seneca, the Huron, the Iroquois. The French, the English, and the native peoples, all armed to the teeth and all fighting to the death for the land they claimed as their own. The truth now, not the propaganda we're getting, the truth, as the records show in ample military reports, in debates over financial support, and in copious correspondence between Lord Fairfax, Governor Dinwiddie, members of the House of Burgesses, General George Braddock, Major George Washington, with the Houses of Parliament, the Duke of Cumberland, and with King George himself, King George II himself is this: Thomas Fairfax, whom we read about in the local paper, who supposedly did nothing, was completely and desperately engaged with his fellow Virginians in the defense of this colony. He was an essential participant in the foundation and defense of the Old Dominion, when it found itself confronted by nothing less than an existential crisis. The French and Indian War, which began with Major George Washington on May 28, 1754 at Jumonville Glen, and afterwards at Fort Necessity, would continue for 7 long, bloody years before England and her colonies emerged triumphant. My friends, there is much Virginia blood in the ground we call our own. How easy it is, 270 years after the fact, to pretend it never happened. That Lord Thomas Fairfax, quote, to quote that infamous newspaper op-ed again, that, quote, no significant contributions to the political development of colonial Virginia, close quote. That we are all here today living in this great land by magic. Magic. That no one risked his life, or his fortune, or his sacred honor to bequeath to us this country. Does the life of Thomas Fairfax really matter to us now? Let's erase him, since we are so much better than he ever was. In the sanctimonious words of Kim Blosser that you can see on the videotape of the meeting, quote, I am quoting directly. She said, it's not a name that lives up to how good we are, close quote. I have to replay the tape to make sure I got it right. On the eve of the Revolution in 1775, the 13 colonies were divided between patriots, who fought for independence, and Tories, whose loyalty remained with the crown. A full third of the population, however, immune to these partisan passions, sat on the fence, warily taking this side or that, depending on which way the wind was blowing. Now, General George Washington and the now aging Lord Fairfax found themselves on opposite sides of this great conflict. How did they conduct themselves? To his credit, Lord Fairfax kept his opinions to himself, remaining quietly at Greenway, never once undermining his old friend. And to his credit, General Washington never insulted, maligned, or bothered his old friend and mentor. For George Washington, friendship and personal loyalty was never sacrificed to the expediencies of the moment. In 1781, less than 2 months after the Battle of Yorktown, Lord Thomas Fairfax died at the age of 88. Like almost all large landowners of this time, whether in Virginia, the West Indies, Brazil, Cuba, or anywhere else in the New World, Fairfax owned slaves. He bought and sold human beings. One doesn't have to be woke to understand how vile and abhorrent slavery was. But in the middle of the 18th century, the whole world was doing it. The entire world, everywhere, every country practiced slavery, as well as child labor, wars of religion, and a host of other horrors no people of compassion countenance today. Can we not see people as they once were, in their full humanity, imperfect then as now, striving then as now? Might our own descendants 240 years from now look upon us in the same way? Otherwise, can we have a continuity of culture, history, or heritage? Do we have a shared humanity with both our ancestors and our descendants? Or are we simply set adrift, floating on an imaginary foundation made up of little more than the thin air of our own puritanical rectitude and moral narcissism? As Robert Penn Warren once wrote, quote, "Moral narcissism is a peculiarly unlovely trait." Is this what we want for our children? Let's talk a minute about these students. Is this what we want for them? Is this what we want to teach them? That they too can be erased by a future generation more woke even than this one? By the standards of the LFCC board, we will soon embark on a renaming crusade. They assure us it won't happen because they know. They know this won't happen. As cities, counties, towns, parks, roads, and institutions of higher learning named after any of the generation who founded this country are removed and replaced one by one. No longer shall our children be taught to know and respect the names Jefferson, Madison, Henry, Hamilton, Monroe, Marshall, Mason, Franklin, or Washington. Whose names will be propped up to replace them? And which Committee of Public Safety will devise this new approved list? My friends, here's the question we must ponder. Is the renaming of this college about education, or is it about indoctrination? When we pull the floor out from under our children, just how far will they fall? Prior to 1492, the Western Hemisphere was inhabited by only its indigenous peoples. Between then and now, much has changed. We cannot turn back the clock, even if we wanted to. It's called history, our history, the history of humanity. To try to dial it back here or dial it back there, to perch on high as inquisitors, enforcing the orthodoxy of our particular moment in time, is an obnoxious and futile endeavor. The fact of the matter is that we, all of us in this room, all of us alive today, are the embodiment of all who came before us. They are all our ancestors. It's who we are. I say this with sadness. I don't know Mr. Wenger. I have no personal axe to grind with him. But his actions on the LFCC board have brought neither harmony nor peace to this community. The opprobrium he has heaped on old Lord Fairfax has fallen instead upon his and this college president's head. Good intentions aren't sufficient when turning the world upside down and inside out. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we have people on Zoom trying to make sure that if you have anything for public comment, you have an opportunity to speak. Please raise your hand through the Zoom world. Not seeing any.
Yeah.
All right, not seeing anybody online. Yes, sir, Mr. Glemmy? I have not closed public speaking yet, public comment.
Page Glennie, Jackson District. That's a tough act to follow, young man. I see you have two decisions in front of you. One is, are you going to hold an appointee accountable? His last year report said he was the eyes and ears. That's not what happened over the last year. You got the timeline, all right? That's not, he did not support you, his principals, in keeping you informed of what was going on. What are you going to do about that? All right. The second thing is all the concern about cancel culture. What are you going to do to nip it in the bud? Are you going to withdraw from organizations that practice it? Are you going to withdraw funding from organizations that practice it? I don't know what your decisions are going to be, all right? But the entire community and your constituents are watching. You need to be very, very careful. Thank you.
All right, closing, yes, ma'am, last one. I know this is a passionate subject.
Heidi Lazinski, Hampton District. I was not going to speak until I just heard that threat. You, the board, who we are supposed to be speaking to, need to understand that people don't email you and people don't call you because your emails are going to be FOIA'd. Your phone records are going to be gone over by people that have ill intent, by people that will then turn around and threaten, just like you heard right there. No one in this room knows what it's like to be harassed and bullied by people in this community like I do. Don't. There you go.
Steve.
Please. I could care less what Lord Fairfax College is called. I don't care. I don't have a dog in this fight. But the fact that they're trying to, again, tear down a very respectable and very respected volunteer in our community is pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. As Mr. Gorfine pointed out, this was not on the agenda. And yet what you're seeing here is a very coordinated effort. Why is that? Why did they know and no one else? RapNet? I'm aware it was on RapNet. No one else is on RapNet because you get bullied when you say something that they don't like. Or, frankly, you get canceled.
Ms. Lazinski.
There are people that used to post on RapNet that were simply removed because they didn't like what they were saying. And yet the people here didn't have a problem with that. I'm a little curious about how many people in this room had as much of a hissy fit when they renamed Reagan National Airport. How much did that cost taxpayers? Where was the outcry then?
No one was canceled. Sorry, she's speaking, sorry.
And I don't know what the rules of procedure are, but giving your time so that somebody can grandstand, I wish you'd reconsider that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's low. Come on, folks. All right, I am closing public comment period.
Madam Chair, I think the record needs to reflect that it is on the agenda, the LFCC name change.
Yes, ma'am, and I promise we've got a full agenda that we have to get to, so go ahead, yes, ma'am.
I wasn't going to say, I was like Heidi, I wasn't going to say anything, but now I am. The president said that there was a standard that they applied. How did the name Lord Fairfax affect the school? And they came up with no effect. Well, when I drive 211 Lee Highway, he doesn't affect my ride up and down that road, but I don't want to change Lee Highway. It doesn't seem like a fair standard, a way of measuring a person. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. All right, I think we should probably take a 5-minute break.
Are you closing the public comment?
Oh, I have to close public comment.
Well, you don't have to. I just want to
I
know
am
if you are.
closing public comment. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
Madam Chairman, I do think there have been several people that did want to speak, but there seemed to be some confusion over whether we were closed or not. Does anyone else wish to speak?
I think I did a pretty good job of asking.
Okay, thank you. I just was
Thank you.
concerned that someone might be overlooked.
Don't want to do that. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow, everybody was to that side. All right, thank you for waiting for that break, and we'll get back started on the agenda. We're next into the consent agenda.
I mean, before we get to that, we were going to loop back to the LFCC update. Does this board want to take any action or issue any communications as a result of what we've heard and thought about the last few days?
Exactly. I'd like to put forward a motion that we send that letter that was discussed, that we send a letter to the state board and CC it to our local board and tell them that our board's not in favor of changing the name and tell them why, because there was no public input.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
I need a second.
So just to be clear, the motion is that this board is not in favor of a name change for LFCC, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion?
Could we just talk about, I think, to loop back into all the parties that should be included so that the communication is effective? It sounds like it needs to go to the state board, the chancellor, who also serves as a secretary for the state board, the working group, and the college president.
You could CC them all on it.
And I assume you want our Delegate Weber and Senator Obenshain and...
Why?
Yes, I think whoever else might be in order as our representatives would be a good idea. I think we should probably also, make reference to this meeting and suggest that folks might want to, watch this meeting for the concerns our constituents have raised.
And who would be writing this letter?
I think it's you and I.
Chair.
Yeah. Any other discussion?
The chair's going to write the letter?
With the assistance of the county administrator.
Okay.
And unless there's a huge rush, I would like to share it with the board one time before I send it, just to make sure it covers what we're looking for.
That's problematic.
Oh, sorry, I can't do that, can I? Darn for you. All right.
When is our very next budget meeting? We could put it on that agenda as well, couldn't we?
10th of March.
I'm sorry?
10th of March.
What time is that?
7 p.m.
I think that there's more urgency in the timing of this than the content. I feel like I'd be very comfortable with the content that we could put forward as long as it, based on our discussion here today, the content would be pretty clear cut. And I'd be more concerned about the timing of the letter and that we get it out as quickly as possible. When we can always send a follow-up letter later if need be.
I think timing is of the essence as well, because she said the school board is probably meeting mid-March, the college board.
Well, I think it can be fairly simple and straightforward that after this board met and the public spoke, we are not in favor of changing the name at this time or any time in the future, in the foreseeable future.
Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, moving into the consent agenda. I'd entertain a motion.
I would make a motion that we adopt the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
I will, just for purpose of discussion, note that I did make one spelling correction with Mr. Curry for a name earlier today.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. I believe that takes us to old business, preliminary FY 2022 budget discussion. Mr. Curry, I think, if I remember correctly, Mr. Graham, he's going to speak to us about the...
Yes, just a couple things. This is really the board's last opportunity to try to provide any shaping to my proposed budget that I'll present on March 10th in the evening. And before Ms. Graham is available to answer any questions on the information that's attached to this agenda item, I do want to reiterate what Dr. Grimsley stated, and that's that the General Assembly Conference Committee came together and they've approved state funding for a 5% raise, both on the school side and state-supported local employees, constitutional officers, social services, et cetera. That's going to be a challenge, given how little of that 5% we actually get from the state.
Exactly.
So I'll be running the numbers and seeing what can fit and what can't fit, and working out all the other inputs from what's happened at the General Assembly to try to formulate a package for the board to start with. That said, the board had some questions about meals and lodging tax. At your last meeting, you asked Commissioner Revenue to put together some information for you, which is attached and provided in the packet. I don't know that she needs to run through it page by page, but she is here and would be more than happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Well, were y'all able to review what I sent? And are there any questions?
I think my primary question, if you could just put in perspective for us on the tourist home front, in particular, is where I'm interested in. Ms. Smith and I've had various conversations about tourist homes, a number of them, revenue related to those, and also the fees we're charging when people apply, and trying to streamline all of that and maximize revenue, because it seems like an area where we're seeing more and more of these applications. My primary question is, if you could just explain that revenue number that I discussed with you during the break. I think you said it's 147,000 over a multi-year period. And I was just curious if you could quantify for us what that represents, approximately how many tourist homes, and then what kind of increase in the lodging tax, what a relative increase in the lodging tax revenue applicable to tourist homes would generate in terms of additional revenue, so we can just ballpark that.
Okay, some of the numbers in this report were provided by the Treasurer's Office, and the section beginning the receipts from taxes collected on page 3, those are really very estimated.
Okay.
So you notice that Debbie provided the tourist homes only portion over this 3.5-year period was approximately 13% of the tax revenue. And that amount, and again, over a 3.5-year period, was $147,000. I looked at the numbers from of the period of 16 through 20. Now, I don't have access to all of that like Debbie Nick does. And so I was looking at things like the reporting. It was brought up last time, the aggregate 4% that a B&B can pay. Well, I can tell you that most B&Bs that offer both meals and lodging, they break it down. They're like, this much is food and this much is lodging, because they don't want to pay a 4% tax on the whole thing when the lodging is 2% and the food is 4%. So when I did some really back of the envelope kind of figuring, it's about 12% of the revenues are from the lodging only.
Okay.
So, and again, this is not exact.
No, that's fine.
But I kind of figured roughly that a 1% increase in that tax would be somewhere around $20,000 a year in increased revenue. So not a huge amount. Most of the income from this area comes from the meals tax, which is, the restaurants and yeah.
Okay.
So that's my feeling. My gut feeling is it's not a big pie to be slicing out of.
I guess my other question is, this is an ongoing issue for a lot of communities where you don't have, where you have Airbnb type rentals that are not registered, and so people might not be remitting the required taxes to, in your case, the local revenue commissioner. I know you're fairly diligent in trying to make sure that you know who is out there.
We are very diligent.
Okay.
We have a process. We scour all of those sites. It's not just Airbnb, it's, Vrbo, and there's others.
Right.
And we look for new listings. I mean, I have one deputy that's dedicated. This is her purview here. And so she can recognize the ones that have been going. She sees a new one or a new, title in Rappahannock, beautiful views, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
We research it. We find out what property is. She contacts them right away, lets them know what's required to comply, and we help them comply. And in a lot of cases, the work we do, the Commissioner of the Revenue Office is tasked with registering them and making sure they file quarterly. Then the treasurer, they're in charge of taking in the revenue and then billing if someone is delinquent. But there's a third part. We also work with zoning, because a lot of these new people that we find, they may need an SUP, a special use permit.
Right.
And so those are immediately referred to Michelle Summers. And, in the past, since we've been really, our eyeball has been on this, there have been 11 applications for special use permits.
Okay. That explains a lot. Yeah.
We are on it. We are working. In fact, during the period that, under my tenure, the numbers are going up.
Good.
So, we do our best. The other flip side of that with Airbnb, there are a couple jurisdictions that have agreements with them.
Right.
Airbnb would not report who is paying the tax. I wouldn't know who is complying because it's something they don't have to sign up for. It's an option. So if they don't sign up for the lodging collection, I would have no idea. But as it is now, we can audit whether they're doing it or not. We can follow up. We can make sure they comply.
And if you identify a tourist home owner who, whether just for, by accident or not knowing that you need to register these things for tax remittance purposes, and maybe this is a question for the treasurer, but in general, are they subject to retroactive liability for unpaid and unremitted taxes?
That's my feeling. Is they should pay for whenever they were in business.
Okay.
Now, again, well, one thing we've done during the last couple of years is people who have not complied. We've collected all their reviews online.
Okay,
So I estimated bills.
okay. That was my question.
I put in bills myself, and they're statutory, and I welcome the people. If you have a better number, then file. I've had at least one party come back to me and say, actually, you were pretty accurate. Sorry, I wasn't doing this. I'm on board now. So yes, we follow up to that extent.
Thanks for all your effort.
Yeah, appreciate it. Anything else?
That's all I have.
I want to follow up real quickly, pardon me. If in fact it is $20,000 of extra revenue per percent.
That's a wild estimate.
On lodging tax, yeah. And that's a sort of number that would be proofed over time if the board made a change, and it may not be completely apparent because there are a lot of other variables changing at the same time. Recall that the Code of Virginia would allow you to increase that rate, but the revenue gained from that 3%, 4%, and 5% must be dedicated to tourism. Which you have some tourism funding now, and it could supplant what's happening now, but it would all be directed, and the idea there is that if, for example, you could collect another $60,000 and you invest that into tourism, then you grow the industry to then maybe provide more meals tax and the other stuff too. But I need to make sure you understand that it's not a windfall of $20,000 for any purpose that the board would want outside of what's already budgeted for tourism.
A related note on that is those monies would have to be accounted for because the state is the one that's saying this has to happen. So that means Debbie Nick would have to be involved in how do we track this. So that would be another task for her to do.
So I just want to recap that because that is a recent change. So the first 2% that we collect, we can use for basically anything. Then percents 3, 4, 5 are specific to tax purposes.
For tourism.
Or tourism purposes. And if it was, it would be $20,000 per percent, so conceivably $60,000 total. We could use specific for tourism-related items that fit the description of what those money should be spent for. And then anything over that percent, we could use for general fund purposes.
That is correct. And that is certain localities have had that opportunity for several years. They just had to be specifically listed in this code section. And so what happened 2 years ago is that the General Assembly took out the special provision part and said, anybody can do this, which includes us. So yeah, you could charge over 5%, 7%, and that extra 2% on top then is general fund.
General fund.
It's that sliver in the middle that it has to be dedicated to tourism.
I can't remember what the cap is, though.
There is no cap in the code. I don't think we would want to test it. Yeah. There's probably a cap in the marketplace.
I think what was brought to our attention at the Planning Commission meeting the other month is that a lot of surrounding localities are at 7 to 8%.
Yeah, I haven't done a survey of it, but a few anecdotal things I've heard from some counties, and I was surprised.
Towns and cities are different, right? So they can charge more.
I think there's not a real big concern about the board imposing more of the lodging tax, but the meals tax we all pay. And Mr. Harris has alluded to that as well publicly, that it's the local people, ourselves included, that will pay that if we stop at Quickie Mart or wherever else.
Yeah, and that, the General Assembly allowed you to change that, increase that from 4 to 6% if you wanted to. There was a ceiling of 4%, now it's a ceiling of 6%.
I'd hate to see us raise that.
Anything else?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry. You stuck around for a long time.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
All right, next is the preliminary review of potential zoning ordinance amendment for short broadband public safety towers. Mr. Curry, would you go through the options you've given us?
Yes, this has been a topic that's been discussed by the board for some time now, and came out of most recently some discussion relative to how you might invest CARES Act money. And some of the providers that the Broadband Committee met with. And your code right now exempts completely from the zoning ordinance wooden poles up to 80 feet tall that are used for broadband. And many people have pointed out to us that 80-foot tall wooden poles with another 10 or more feet of embedment are not really very frequently seen. So there isn't a lot of value in that exemption. So there was a discussion, well, the board could broaden that exemption so it's not just wooden poles. It could be any kind of tower as long as it's used for broadband. And I said, well, hey, if you're going to do broadband, why don't you mention public safety too? Because you never know when that is going to be a need for us. But as Mr. Goff and I reviewed that, a full exemption from your zoning ordinance is just that. There's no zoning permit needed. It can go anywhere. There can be 15 of them on a parcel. There's absolutely no limitations whatsoever from a zoning perspective. There would still be a building permit, but there's no zoning limitation at all. So Mr. Goff and I suggested another route would be to include them as another kind of permit in your zoning ordinance that was an administratively grantable permit. So if you meet X, Y, and Z, you are allowed to have a 80-foot tall tower made of anything that, makes sense for towers and meets the building code, as long as it meets a few certain things. And that might be, we've provided a draft ordinance that had some suggestions, but the board could expand those suggestions or modify those suggestions as you thought was most appropriate for the community. I can pull that up. And for the definition of the facility would be basically what we talked about for the exemption. And also there was discussion from our providers that it's important to use microwave for backhaul for these short towers that are tucked away if you're going to serve several houses around there, because there's probably no other way to get data to those. There's no fiber to the middle of, a very rural area, but you could get microwave. And so this proposed definition identifies that 80 feet in height or less with antennas allowing microwave dishes, and those dishes have a face area no more than 8 square feet. Nothing magical in 8 square feet other than it's about 3-foot diameter, and they come in all different shapes. The board could pick any other number there if you wanted. You probably don't want to keep it open-ended because microwave dishes can be very big. It's unlikely they would be in this context, but you never know. And the exemption language used to identify that the tower could be used on the parcel for the person who owns the parcel or to serve people in adjacent parcels, even if they're in a different county. And so that exemption language was carried over into this definition. So this section of the ordinance, in the telecommunications section of your zoning ordinance, already had definitions for category 1, 2, 3, and 4 facilities. And so this is just a category 5, a new type of wireless facility. The meat of this is much further down, and I included the whole ordinance to make sure the board and the public could see the full picture of how it fit in. The ordinance sets out a fee, which just put $50 in, similar to what we charge for a zoning permit. We charge a lot more for the other types of permits because they require public hearings, and we have to run advertisements, and it costs money. But for this, it would just be administrative fee in the office.
Does that 8 square foot, does that actually resemble something that's in use, or is that just an arbitrary number?
It's arbitrary to some extent, although happy to talk to any provider on, like I said, it's about 3-foot diameter, a little bigger than 3-foot diameter. So there are several sections that provide specific requirements for each category use of towers, so the category 1, 2, 3, 4. And so adding a separate detailed section for requirements for these new category 5 facilities it could include any number of things that the board thinks is important. And so the following items are listed. Facilities shall meet only the following requirements for administrative permit approval, notwithstanding other requirements of this article to the contrary. Because other sections of the article say you have to go through a public hearing process. And they say you can't have microwave at all. So it has to have that leading statement. Notwithstanding what we said, all these other places you can't do for these category 5 uses, they're special. These are the rules. And this is on board docs. So very clearly, no special use permit, it's administrative zoning permit. Recognizing that there was a lot of discussion during the comprehensive plan update about towers along scenic areas and along heavily traveled areas, it seemed like a setback from your primary highways may serve that purpose. I'm not sure what the right number is. This throws 1,000 feet in there. So none of us would want to see an 80-foot tower probably 10 feet off of, or maybe 80 feet off of the side of Route 522 on Eldon Farms. So how would you manage that? Rather than getting into picking different types of zoning districts, it seemed that a setback from those major roads. Now, if you're a backcountry road, that's probably less of a concern. But maybe it's not. You could have a setback from any road if you wanted to. The fact that it would have a coating that is neutral or non-reflective. And this would be a determination made by a zoning administrator. Ultimately, if the zoning administrator denied a permit because she felt that the coating wasn't neutral or non-reflective, then the person could appeal to the BZA. But trying to get too detailed here, if it's in a field of trees, one sort of color would make sense. If it's in a field of grass and something else, and if it has the sky in the background, maybe something else. So trying to be general. Making very clear, even though FAA wouldn't require tower lighting, you can't have it. We certainly don't want blinking lights. Picking up from one of the other categories, you can't put these in the floodplain. That seems to make sense. You can't fill wetlands and or cause significant deforestation for this. Maybe that's important, maybe it's not. We heard the other day about Starlink, and it needs a certain view of the sky. And maybe deforestation to some extent is required in addition to an 80-foot pole. I don't know. And then rather than require a site plan, which is very specifically mentioned in the zoning ordinance and has very specific requirements, and it's an engineering plan, this would call for something not as detailed, a scaled plot plan. Somebody taking their plat, measuring by scale where the location of the tower is. Enough detail that the zoning administrator could determine where it is on site, making sure it meets setback requirements as included in this section, which is listed as 110% of its height, and making sure it meets whatever setback from roads are, and that really meets the requirement. In addition, provide drawings showing what it is you're planning on doing. Where are the underground wires? What exactly you're going to be hanging on this tower? And all of that would be reviewed administratively. No public hearing. And so that is a significant departure from how you handle any towers right now, which would have to go through the Planning Commission and then the Board of Supervisors. So this section could be expanded to include other restrictions or to reduce some of these restrictions, dependent on how the board thought the view shed would have to be protected, balanced with the need for citizens to have access to these sort of towers. So these are, if the board were to move forward, Art and I strongly recommend that you take the approach of an administrative permit rather than a broadened exemption. This does allow towers to be right on your property line if your neighbor says it's okay in writing. So some things like that, maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. You can put it right next to your own building if you want. If it's your building, your peril, you see it all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. I appreciate your adding this to the agenda for today. After I requested this be added after our Broadband Authority meeting the other week where it was clear that we really need to drill into this language and figure out which way we want to go if we're going to make some headway. So I don't know if the board members have a strong feeling one way or the other, but I'd suggest we need to review this and have some proposed language so we can put that out for advertisement next month.
This would have to go to the planning commission, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so the board, this is a zoning ordinance change, or will be a zoning ordinance change, so it must go to the planning commission. That means you could do that a couple different ways. You could pass these drafts in concept form to the planning commission and tell them, you get the idea of this administrative permit route or exemption route. We'd like you to put your wisdom into it and polish it off, put it to public hearing and so we can get it back to us. Or you could send something very specific to them by resolution and say, consider this version, and oh, by the way, if you don't hold your public hearing and do all the things that you need to do within a certain period of time, we'll go ahead and hold a public hearing without your input. And you've done that before. So both options are available. I would think you would want the planning commission to shape it if possible, but you don't want it to go there to die.
It won't die.
The current chair, I'm sure that's not the case.
It's not, no, we'll move fast. It's up, sorry?
You're the chairman of the planning commission. What do you want to do?
I just said we'll move quickly. If you want to just send it in this draft form, we'll get it on there right away and be done with it.
That's what I think.
I mean, I think I agree with you. I mean, this goes right to broadband service and the need to accelerate it, so.
We need a resolution or just a vote?
But if you did a resolution, then it would be clearly referred with and you could invoke whatever it is, 15-2-2580, or I can't even remember the 2285, I think, with that requirement to return. But if you just want to send it down with an express plan, I would say you do that by motion, and so the planning commission is clear what it is you're asking them to do. Are you asking them to look at both versions, both options, only one option?
Well, I think if the planning commission receives it, then they can work on it, whatever I think, they think that it needs, but I don't see a resolution unless.
No, I did not prepare a resolution.
Well, with just a voice vote, then I would put forward a motion that we forward this to the planning commission and ask them to review it post haste, however you want to say that. I worked for a place one time where we had jobs that had to be done by a certain time, but ASAP was ahead of that, and so maybe we should put ASAP on it instead of a date.
I get the point, so.
So let me be clear. Does the Board of Supervisors have any interest in seeing a different version from the Planning Commission before they move to public hearing?
I trust the planning commission to do the work, and if they run into snarls at the planning commission level, I mean, we have an update agenda item where we could take feedback and discuss any concerns as it works its way through the planning commission.
Then we'd have a public hearing as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
This board could amend the language if necessary when it comes back to us.
Correct. As long as we advertise it properly. So I got a motion by Mr. Frazier. I don't know that I heard a second.
Second.
I'll second.
Did Ms. Smith do a second?
Oh, I didn't hear.
I can't hear with my mask on either.
Okay. Ms. Smith did. All right, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I'm not sure what agenda item the members of the electoral board are here for, but I do know how very uncomfortable those benches are, and I was wondering if we could do that agenda item next by any chance.
Which agenda item?
Madam Chairman, just to address you for one moment. We just don't know if we missed that the supplemental appropriations were approved.
They were.
It's done.
It's done.
They were.
It was in the consent agenda.
We were just, that's why we're here. I appreciate you having that.
I saw everybody starting to stretch, so.
I thought you were here just for the fun of it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on to new business. Board of Supervisors staff focus and prioritization. I asked that Mr. Curry put this on the agenda. Ultimately, I'd like to lead us to some point where we do a strategic plan for the county, but it would be very helpful, I think, for everyone if we could go through what we believe individually our top work items are for this year. And I bet a lot of them are going to overlap, which is great. And then we can give Mr. Curry direction for focus. And then if he has an emergency come up, he'll know to come to us to say, okay, which one of the 5 you gave me I need to get rid of because I got to take care of something else. So I'd like to go through each member one at a time and just hear what you're thinking your top priorities are for this year.
I'll go last.
Okay. Mr. Parrish, you want to go first?
Geez, I didn't talk about it that much, so you want to say what the things we want to get accomplished in the near future? So?
There's a lot of stuff going on, obviously. I've got at least 5 items that I'm interested in. So if we can kind of come to an agreement where the focus of his time and his staff time is to be, then we have a better understanding and the citizens have an understanding of where we're working this year.
We have, we've left the sign ordinance and a few ordinances like that to deal with. We got these zoning maps that are not particularly accurate, and that we can deal with that, hopefully without using GIS. And anyway, there's 2 of them.
Okay. We can keep coming around if you think of something else.
Well, we can go back to the maps around the villages. We never really, which is actually, never mind, that includes what I already just said.
Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Frazier?
I have to agree with Mr. Parrish on those 2 items, but I think those are matters for our planning commission to be working on, not so much the county administrator, but I think that we need to keep pushing forward with the building projects that we have, and also this employee handbook. I think that got derailed. So those are types of things that I think that we need to keep working towards.
Right. Ms. Smith?
I have to say, I found myself challenged to prepare for this agenda item simply because I don't honestly know how much time Mr. Curry spends on certain tasks currently and what he considers his current priorities to be. And so when I was preparing for this agenda item, it sort of reminded me of the Planning Commission meeting where we were asked to rate the comprehensive plan. And I don't want to give an answer like it has a good beat and I can dance to it. I feel like this is a very critical concern. The way that we handle this determines the success with which we will address the current pressing needs of our citizens. And so I really believe that we need to have more information to give a more informed answer to this question, and know like what currently is being done and how time is currently being spent, what items are farmed out, what items are done by staff, before I can give a reasonable answer. I think the first and foremost item, though, that we all should agree on for this year, right now, for our county administrator, is getting through the current budget with no tax increase. That should be the focus of county administration. And I believe that is what Mr. Curry spends his time on currently, from our communication with him. But I think that should be the primary concern until the budget is adopted, is how do we navigate this year with no tax increase?
Mr. Whitson, you ready?
Wow. These are relatively straightforward, and I will admit on the latter 2 items, I don't know all of the details because these are not subject matter areas in which I'm directly involved. So Any of my board colleagues are welcome to reshape my priorities or change the language. But the first one for me is, I think, relatively simple. Mr. Curry seems to be focused on it. I would like to see the work at Flatwood and Amosville wrapped up, including whatever the plan is with the trenches. I'd like to see the entrance at Amosville re-gravelled, and the entrance and exit at Flatwood re-gravelled. Mr. Frazier brought up a good point. He was at the Amosville refuse and recycling site not too long ago, and he didn't recognize anybody, which led to the question, what are we doing to control Culpeper use of that facility? And so part and parcel of the final site work would also be moving forward this contemplated plan for window stickers so that we can reduce costs to our taxpayers by reducing the volume of trash going over the mountain that doesn't belong to us. And then finally, I mean, this is a very detailed thing in Amosville. I know I've talked with Mr. Curry before, and I saw Joe over there the other day, just the turning radius around the current compactor site. I don't know if anything can be done with that, but just in general, I think it'd be great for our citizens to have those facilities finished, and obviously we're all grateful for everything that's already been done. I think it'd just be nice to wrap it up. My second item, the building study that we already have in hand that's been released publicly gives some priorities for repair. We had a joint meeting last year with the building committee, and I really would like to make sure that we're moving forward with shoring up and doing obviously needed repairs to the historic buildings here on Courthouse Row, setting a plan and doing something. Because we talked about it quite a while ago, and I'd like to kind of know what our plan is, what are we tackling first? And that's separate and apart from the broader discussion of space utilization and whether we need a new building for the courthouse, et cetera. I'm just talking about what do we do right now with these buildings on Courthouse Road. Madam Chair, my third item, and I defer to you and Ms. Smith and Mr. Frazier, who are all deep in this, but I wonder what, from a practical perspective, we need to do on the 24/7 ALS accommodation front. What's the plan there? Where, how, what do we as a county government need to do? What needs to be prepared? What facilities need to be altered, changed, et cetera? So those are my three big ones, and obviously there are others, but those are what came to mind. Thank you.
Okay. I think I read in Mr. Curry's report that he's doing twice a month now, that you did have a conversation about stickers for the windows or something to do with Culpeper?
Yeah, I had a meeting, or I had a online meeting with Culpeper representatives that I sent some details to Mr. Frazier just because it's in the Jackson district and wanted to get his read first. I guess that's pending and ready to move to the next step of, ultimately be crafting a proposal for the board to endorse.
Okay.
Thank you. So I definitely overlap. The fire and rescue, I think, takes a bit of time because of the emergency services coordinator position, and I think you're looking for interviews to start second week of March?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any idea, expectation on if there is someone in that group that is suggested or requested to join the county, when that person would actually be able to come aboard? Is it a 2 week
Depends
or
on
a
their,
4?
it could be 1 week if they don't have obligations to a current employer, but it would be dependent on their obligations to their current employer.
Okay. And your expectation as to how quickly they'll come up to speed in Rappahannock County?
Tell you after the interviews.
Right.
Are the interviews with all of the folks on that organization, that administrators committee, or are the interviews just with you, Mr. Curry?
No, that's, the committee will sit in the interviews.
I would just say, for my 2 cents, this is your employee, Mr. Curry. If we want to expedite the process, you should handle who you feel comfortable hiring.
I appreciate that, and, I've motives for my operation, and one is consensus building, and you know, having several people provide input is healthy for me to see different perspectives coming from a law perspective or a fire and rescue perspective, and then board members. So the dates of these is largely driven by the budget right now. So that's why they're after the 10th of March.
All right, I had the next. Broadband obviously is of paramount on my list anyway, but it's probably something I've been living for 2 years, so that's why.
That brings up a very good question, and that is, what role am I to play with the Broadband Authority?
I guess we have to decide that first.
Okay.
Because we haven't completed the bylaws yet, so. My guess is that this board will, the authority board will need your assistance in some ways.
Somebody's assistance.
Well, since we have a 0 bank account, you're first on the list, right? Buildings, I totally agree. And I know that some degree you want to know that a building is going to remain in use to fix it up, but buildings that get into great disrepair end up being a lot more expensive to fix. So if we can do, and I don't know what you need from this board, but if we can do something to help.
You may have an update from the building committee later in the meeting, I'm not sure, but there was discussion on that front on a preliminary basis at their last meeting.
And I think those are the ones I had, so I don't think we're looking at anything, any huge project that's different from the list that we've got. But the one other question I had for this board is, are there any meetings that we go to that Mr. Curry attends, especially in the evening, that would make sense to bring into the general agenda of our board meeting so that we don't have so many night meetings? The one that comes to mind is just the Rules Committee. I didn't know if that was something that we could bring in.
That's morning, 9 o'clock in the morning.
I mean, it's up to Mr. Curry how cumbersome he finds that meeting to be. It's a 9 o'clock in the morning meeting. It lasts an hour. I find it to be that we've been able to move nimbly through anything that's requested of us to do. Probably more conducive atmosphere than 5 to work with 2. But, you know, pleasure of the board.
What exactly is the chair looking to do?
Just trying to figure out if there's a way, like with the combination of the Broadband Authority meeting being right before a work session, if we choose to have a work session, it seems to me you kind of, it's easier to schedule, and it's not another day and another meeting. It's all, you know, it's back to back. So I didn't know if there was just a way to make it more convenient for all of us and Mr. Curry, and maybe not use Tuesday through Thursday or Monday through Thursday for meetings that we all have to attend. We'd have 2 on Monday and 2 on Tuesday or something.
The Rules Committee is only 2 board members, and we don't have to meet every month, but we have set that date up in case we do. The Building Committee right now, it appears that the majority wants the building and grounds work to actually be executed, so I don't know how that we would continue doing that and not meeting with the Building Committee. So really, I mean, I don't see where we're not getting much work done with the schedule that we're doing. I mean, not the Building Committee, but the Board of Supervisors, and now with this Broadband Authority, if we don't meet, I don't know how we're gonna get anything done.
Let's just leave it at 1 then.
Okay. Looking for ideas if we have any, please.
Yep. Good to think about.
All right. Next, I have the disband Board of Supervisors committees that are no longer in use. The Tower Site Location Task Force, I think, was pre-me anyway. Mr. Curry, can you explain that one, please?
This was pre-me, but it was developed to try to solve the problem of not having a Sperryville area, western tower location. It was formed by motion in a meeting and hasn't met in multiple years now that there is a western tower. It seemed to me that it would be good to formally take it off the books, and if some other tower-centric committee is needed in the future, you could create it.
Mr. Curry, I serve on that committee, so it can't have been pre-you, because we came on at the same time.
But
We didn't meet much, if at all. If you just need a motion and a second to disband it, I'll be happy to make the motion.
I think you replaced maybe Mr. Bennick.
That's correct.
I think maybe we ought to take the lead from the federal government on this, just leave it in place and give it some money.
So you might, if you have the boards of a mind to eliminate the task force, you might do it in one vote if you're of a mind to eliminate both. The other is the broadband committee. And I don't know the board's feeling. The broadband authority now would seem to be the authority in those matters, and they may choose to create committees of that body. It seems duplicative to me to have a broadband committee, a broadband authority, and then committees of the broadband authority. But certainly is a pleasure of the board on what committees serve you.
Should we separate these motions for each one?
No, I guess my point of jumping in was that if a motion's in order, you could take care of both at one time.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move that we,
She's got.
oh, you did? I'm sorry. I thought you were asking, sorry.
No, I think I made a motion to, what do you call it, disband the tower committee.
Would you like to combine that?
No, I would not.
Okay.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to disband the Tower Site Location Task Force. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Broadband Committee, I would make a motion that we disband the Broadband Committee. Happy to say that they will probably stay engaged. I hope they will stay engaged, but in a different context with the authority.
I'll second.
Quick discussion. I just think it might be, I just think it might be a little more, I'm not sure exactly what the word is, that there might be more continuity if we had a joint meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Broadband Committee and recognized their service and awarded them some thank yous, and at that time formally disbanded the Broadband Committee.
So, we got an authority, a broadband authority right now, and there was discussion about entertaining help from citizens. So that would be a broadband committee, no?
It's a committee of the authority.
Yeah, a committee from the authority. So, I mean, if that's the case, why wouldn't we just leave this committee in place so that we could put people in it when the time came?
It's because the authority is not the Board of Supervisors.
It is right now.
Okay, so we need to eliminate this so we can recreate it in a different
Right.
avenue, by a different avenue, okay.
And Ms. Smith's point, I believe, is one of timing, and do you want to do this in some more ceremonial way in recognizing the members of the committee? I think.
I certainly can support Ms. Smith's position, but I think if we're going to have a joint meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Broadband Committee, that we schedule a joint meeting of the Broadband Authority and the Board of Supervisors as well, so we don't have the complications that we had last time.
Could we just find a way to recognize the service of the broadband committee members and simplify it? I appreciate Ms. Smith's point there, and it's a good one. I just wonder if there's in some other way we just kind of clean this up administratively. I mean, we've got authorities and committees and boards and,
Is there any reason the authority couldn't invite the members that are, that were on the Broadband Committee to our meeting to be recognized?
I don't think you should do that.
No?
No, because you'd be acting as the Board of Supervisors if you're going to recognize.
Oh, that's right, the authority can't recognize.
For the record, I don't like the idea of the authority board and the Board of Supervisors holding joint meetings because the public would have the perception that anything under the sun and of the purview of the Board of Supervisors could happen during that meeting.
Right.
Rather than the discussion being constrained to broadband. Legally, you can't take an action if you're not in a convened meeting, so.
I understand that, but that's what led to the confusion at the last meeting. The authority had no authority to meet because it had never been constituted. So there was no one that actually had the authority to open that meeting, to set an agenda, to do anything. If we had had a joint meeting of the board and the authority, then we could have corrected that at the very beginning.
The board has no authority over the authority.
I understand that, but the authority had no authority to meet. It was just constituted, but there was no one to actually authorize to put an agenda together.
I will notice any meetings the board wants me to notice. I've given my recommendation.
Actually, I just think if we're meeting to recognize their service, and it's the Board of Supervisors that recognizes their service, and we're not getting into any actual authority business, that really all we need to notice is a meeting of the broadband committee and the
We could then
Board of Supervisors.
adjourn that meeting and let the authority continue.
Well, if we're going to have a whole nother meeting just for that, that doesn't seem, we got enough meetings.
No, I was thinking that we would do it at the April meeting of the Board of Supervisors.
So have the broadband authority meeting
Committee.
as
Committee.
planned,
Right.
and then have the broadband committee be recognized in April at our meeting.
Correct.
So we could disband it now and still recognize them in April, or not?
Let's do that. We got a motion in a second.
All right, we have a motion and a second for the broadband committee to be disbanded. Close discussion. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
3-2. All right, information reports and correspondence. Board committee reports.
I can jump in real quickly on the planning commission. We met on February 17th, and that night the weather was supposed to be bad and wasn't that bad in the end, so we had a pretty quick, efficient meeting. The highlights are there were 2 SUP special use permit applications for tourist homes, one the Eastams on Richmond Road that was referred to the Board of Zoning Appeals with a recommendation for approval. There was a special use permit application for Vitale on Cedar Run Lane over near Sperryville. And that one was tabled because of the May amendments and road standards applicable to that application. And so Michelle Summers is determining what needs to be done to this to find out if the road standards there are met. And then there was a special exception permit, which I think you all know about it because most of you were at the meeting. This is an application for a brewery on 211. I think generally it seems like a good application. However, the site, the location is particularly difficult. And so there was Mr. Henry on the Planning Commission, I think made a good recommendation, which is they need to get a site plan, and that relates to parking and runoff and other factors. So that's sort of on hold for now. And then finally, Mr. Taylor, and this is a rezoning application for the Mount Airy Field, and that was moved on to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation for further consideration. And that pretty much wraps up that meeting. That's all I have. Thank you.
Question?
Yeah.
Further consideration by who?
Us, Board of Supervisors.
That was problematic when I first heard of what happened at that meeting, that the planning commission sent us a rezoning request with no recommendation.
It was a recommendation to proceed with a review of the application. So
That's what we would have done anyways. That's kind of perfunctory.
Right.
So you're recommending that we do our job.
That's correct.
But the planning commission didn't want to do theirs.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I saw that the planning commission didn't want to actually do any planning work.
I think the planning commission, as I stated during the meeting, developed a pretty complete and robust case record, and I think there's a lot of information there through their work. And it was very much there was no clear indication either way where it was headed. So that's what you have.
All right, Mr. Frazier, Building Committee?
Building committee met, we had a complete committee membership show up, which was good. And we discussed the Wiley Wilson plan, and I don't have it in front of me. I didn't bring it. I thought maybe it would be on the agenda, but Wiley Wilson has proposed bringing in some consultants to look at the roofs on different buildings and the moisture content and the exterior of the buildings, and also measure it inside to see how much penetration we have of moisture. So it's another pricey review, but they feel that they actually need it, so it needs to be, I guess, discussed by this board as to what extent we want to try and find out the potential moisture issue that we have in the building itself, mostly the courthouse, but all the buildings. And that I mean, there's some discussion, there was discussion about what roofs we would look at, and but basically the water penetration is typical for the courthouse and the dependencies next door. It's about a $54,000 price tag, I think.
What's it $64,000 for?
54.
For what?
It's to bring in a roofing consultant to look at the life expectancy of the different roofs. I think there's 8 or 9 roofs on that list that we kind of dwindled it down to. And then also to bring in this group to do soil samples and interior wall samples of moisture content in this building and the dependencies next door, so that they have an idea going forward. I mean, I know there's moisture. Anybody can tell there's moisture, but what that moisture is, the architects feel that they would like to have a pretty good handle on what it is exactly.
Some of the work would also be checking to see, what the mortar is made of, and how we would have to move the work forward in a way that would be compatible, so that we would be using mortar and materials that would help the current situation and not ultimately be detrimental to the historic buildings.
The quote that was used by the Wiley Wilson representative is that this courthouse, because in the dependencies, because of all the work that's been done over the years, some of it improperly, and just the fact that the glazing is gone now from these 200 plus or almost 200-year-old brick. It's basically just a well-stacked pile of clay. That's what we're in right now.
So the subconsultant price tag was very high, and the committee asked to get an example report that the consultant performed for some other company, or county, or building, so they could see what exactly it would be that we would be buying. And it's condition assessment of the historical masonry, the wood, and then recommendations on what do you do about it. And that layered on top of that was the roofs, which was the cheap part. But it's the masonry and the wood, and they're talking about flying drones all around the higher elevations of everything, and taking providing detailed information. So before we see what a report like that looks like, what the output might be, I think the committee is moving slowly on saying, yeah, charge forward, let's do this, and recommending it to the board of supervisors.
We just want to know what the outcome will be from the analysis that we're doing, and are we really getting something that we can work with at the end of the day for the money that we would spend. We did also come up with an idea of maybe going ahead and looking at the roofs independently and getting that one, kind of prioritizing that work, but there is savings there to doing all the work at the same time, rather than having folks come out for one study and then come back to check the roofs. So we ultimately decided against that.
That was essentially it. We're trying to figure out what is the best way to move forward. This process, if we go into it, it looks like it's about 5 or 6 months before we would have any working diagrams or information from it. And unfortunately, that's gonna put us towards the end of the construction cycle. We'll start getting into, by the time you put something on the street, you're looking at winter again.
All right, thank you. Recreation Facilities Authority?
We did meet this month, discussed, I'm sure everyone's seen that the water stack will be in October. We continued to discuss the current projects regarding the restroom and also the little trail that's being contemplated around the park, and also some handrail improvements that are being done. It was a very productive and actually very short meeting this month, but a lot of good work being done over there, and certainly a lot of people taking advantage of the facilities on such beautiful days like we had this past weekend.
Thank you. Public Safety Committee, keep going.
Also, mostly uneventful meeting, except for the public comment period, which I think we all have seen. There are some concerns with the way some of the calls are being dispatched in terms of their order of dues. It does seem like there is a committee of the association formed that will be meeting to sort through those details. That system appears to still be in the testing phase, where this can all be reconciled, I would say, relatively easily if the right parties are in the room at the same time. And so I'm hopeful that there will be some recommendations coming out of the meeting, the association committee meeting on Thursday evening, that will start to alleviate these issues. We did take immediate action in the meeting, basically a vote of confidence for the sheriff, that to any calls from Massey's Corner on up to Chester Gap to call out Company 9 as she saw fit. It seemed like it would improve response times, and also since there's paid staff up there, it's a prudent use of taxpayer dollars. And it immediately addressed the public safety needs that may arise from the way the dues are in the system currently. There's also the old manual, the black book that they have in the sheriff's office, which can be consulted when dues are called, and that is correct as well. So, they have a couple places that they can double check when they call out the different companies. But I know that was received quite a bit of press, and I'm happy to answer any questions as I can about that. I know Ms. Donahue sent a letter out, and I think some of those points we already addressed at the Public Safety Committee level. And I'm confident that most of them will be addressed at the association meeting on Thursday evening. I do plan to attend, although for noticing reasons, no board members were included in that committee.
I think part of their task is to look at the relationship with the outside vendors, as well as how we went from the book correct information to the computer inaccurate information, and just try to put in some sort of checks and balances to make sure that can't happen again, I think.
This is an association meeting or a committee of the association?
It's a committee that they
But
formed.
The association has to also notice their meetings.
They've been advised of that, so they would do it.
It's already been noticed.
Already been noticed?
All right, thank you.
And of course, the Public Safety Committee is poised to act at any time if there's a development where it would be fruitful for us to meet. I will certainly call a special meeting.
Rules Committee?
Well, that's me too. I'm so sorry.
I said keep on going. We meet before the Building Committee. We took action on 2 items, one of which is the resolution on this evening's agenda, the other of which is some language relating to tabling matters in the language regarding meetings of the Board of Supervisors. And we did work through some language. Has that been sent to Mr. Goff, Mr. Curry? Is that where that's at?
Yes.
Okay, for review. And there were one or two other items which we will meet again and discuss next month, make some headway on. It does seem to be, I would just say, as a member of the building committee and as a member of the rules committee, it seems to be fruitful and time well spent to have back-to-back meetings and be able to work through those matters efficiently and succinctly within a course of a morning and be done by, 11:30.
All right, and Fire Levy Board, Dave Jarrell is now the chairman of the Fire Levy Board, and he submitted a letter to Mr. Curry that the bill submissions, there's a total of $294,768.01 for the 6-month period audit that was done. I can say the pats on the back for the companies that have done such a nice job getting their submissions in order. Everybody was just really happy with what they saw, and Company 4 specifically got a lot of pats on the back for getting their reporting as close to the others as possible. So, okay. Treasurer's reports. We normally just.
Yeah,
If
if board members haven't looked at the sales tax chart, I suggest you do that. Continues to show people are shopping at home, and we are now getting our taxes from those folks. We're very grateful. So this will show up as a significant increase in revenue from FY21, because FY21, our budget showed a very low number. We pulled it back.
And how much of that do you think is from the Amazon world?
Don't know.
Okay.
The treasurer may have an idea, I'm not sure.
Summarize expenditure. Okay. Anything else under treasurer's report?
No. Everything looks great.
Okay.
Well, I did include this contingency budget accounting
yes.
for the board. And if you haven't looked at it, I don't want to take a lot of time to go through it, because I know you still have action items to go through. The bottom line is that the board recalls that you appropriated funds into the contingency budget for the CARES Act cash, and then you had certain requirements for restricted use of some of those funds. One was for fund balance, funded contingency, the $100,000. One was a frozen portion to be used for EMS paid personnel. And one was for frozen funding that was supposed to go to RCPS. Those funds are still setting in that account and have not been, I guess, unthawed, unfrozen. And they amount to $453,472. You have $834,000 right now, which basically means that the bottom line is that there's $380,000, $381,000 of unallocated budget in the contingency fund that the board could allocate to a necessary one-time use. Whether that be this year or next year. If it's not used this year, it'll fall to the fund balance and be used for something else. But any of our EMS costs or anything like that for one-time uses could be funded from this, and it's largely due to using your public safety payroll to account for your CARES money. Happy to answer questions on that at any time the board would like, but it's here in the packet for you to review.
Thank you for putting that together. All right, if there's nothing more on treasurer's report, review of legal matters, I think that has stayed the same.
Yeah. Just the Capielli General District, and then the Capielli and General District Court and Circuit Court regarding the site, the Capielli appeal, which we understand he's hired legal counsel. That hasn't changed. And then the Frazier case, there's no change in that either.
Thank you for your updates. I think we all got those. Anything on building permits?
If you didn't look at it, they're noting $2.7 million of improvements, which is an estimate, but those ultimately lead to tax dollars eventually,
Yeah.
and that's good.
Zoning, VDOT, Comcast. Anything there that we need? Okay. All right, moving along to matters presented by the board.
Madam Chair, very quickly, I don't want to take too much time. We sent on February 8th, Ms. Smith and I authored a letter to Mr. Holberg at the U.S. Postal Service related to the outstanding request for a temporary facility, including limited retail operations located somewhere close to the town of Washington. It's my understanding that we've not heard back in response to our letter. We also asked for a site visit, and I think Ms. Smith and I agreed it was important for somebody from the Postal Service to come and see the current site for the post office that everyone's waiting for, but also to see what's going on in Sperryville and Ms. Smith's district, because it's not good. And we sent this letter on February 8th, and if it's a pleasure to the board, I think we should ask Ms. Donahue on our behalf to follow up with Mr. Holberg and point out to him that we are seeking a response, and ASAP or with haste or whatever.
I think with haste is great, and the more I think about how this has transpired, the crazier it is. I mean, when I drive through Flint Hill, that postal facility would seem to have so much more room and parking, and it's more modern and well-served, I would say, in terms of parking and folks' ability to get in and out than the Sperryville facility. And really, it's almost exactly the same amount of miles from Flint Hill to the town of Washington. Maybe they should move it to Flint Hill.
Yeah, they've indicated that they don't want to incur the cost of moving and then moving again, but I think, to me, that's beside the point. We need something done. We sent, I think, a very strongly worded letter, and I'm just asking if we could please follow up, and I just want to raise that with the board.
And I mean, if they're not willing to open up a temporary facility or anything like that, maybe everything should just be routed to Flint Hill until the facility reopens.
Right.
I mean, I think that we've just probably lost another month from the last time we received a construction update. If somebody's been able to get construction done in this last month, it would be a miracle with all the snow and ice and rain we've gotten. I can't imagine much has been accomplished. So I think maybe, we should take alternate tact and say, well, hey, if you're not willing to put up something temporary to give us some respite in Sperryville, take it to Flint Hill and give us a break.
If the board agrees with Mr. Whitson, I will work with you on the strong letters to follow.
Sure. You may need to send the letter to somebody else. I believe the response was, you've already heard from the guy who talked to Senator Kane, and I read that to be, he's above my pay grade. You leapfrog me, you go to the higher up.
We can just resend the letter with a cover letter attached to it to that individual and just say, this is what we sent on February 8th and we're still waiting a response. I think that's the way to handle it. Very quickly, I just wanted to give my colleagues a heads up that I brought this up once before, and now I've at least have found a practical next step, and I want you to all be aware of it. So we denied the special exception permit for a country inn on the commercial property on Clark Lane. We did that last March. Since that time, as I mentioned before, and I continue to hear from my constituents who reside on Clark Lane, the property owners of that commercial operation are increasingly expanding the activities on that property, as really with sort of state agritourism exemptions, I suppose is one way to describe it. And so we have a situation where we denied a special exception for a country inn because of the very limited right-of-way. I mean, it's a tiny lane. And so now what we have are even more activities than were contemplated when the country inn application came in. So what I'm going to do is an immediate next step is request a meeting with VDOT, with Mr. Nesbitt, and then whoever he thinks should join. And I want to physically go out there and look at in particular, the entrance to Clark Lane because there are, my understanding is there are certain entrance standards that would apply for agritourism activities. And so I just wanted everyone to have the heads up that I'm going to request that meeting and go take a look because Clark Lane is now increasingly in poor repair because of the increased traffic, and it seems that traffic overall has continued to increase even though we denied an application for the reasons that we're seeing exactly, which is too much traffic on a little lane, having an adverse effect on the residents. And so I'm very focused on that. And finally, just a quick heads up, I received from a constituent and her attorney a proposal for a possible change to our zoning ordinance for one-day limited small events as sort of an additional activity that might be allowed for B&Bs and tourist homes. And so I will put that on the agenda for next month so we can at least talk about it and see if there's any agreement that's something we would want to consider. But the gist of it is really just additional standards within the zoning ordinance that would apply to one-day events, one-day small gatherings for B&Bs and tourist homes. And I just put that out there just to let you know it's coming. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Ms. Smith?
I was wondering if Mr. Curry could provide us an update from the library board meeting, and are they open again at the library?
Unfortunately, I had to leave the meeting before it finished. With the library board, they agreed, authorized the chair or president to sign the agreement with the architectural firm for the renovation project. Did discuss the opening and that power is vested in the president and the library director to make that decision between meetings as case may need to happen, rather than have to call a meeting. They were hoping to transition back to the limited opening like they were before. And right now we are back to full staff, which is nice. We just made it higher, so we have 3 staff there again. So that's the best I can offer right now. I can seek to get a better update.
Oh, I see from their website that they're not open at least until March 15th.
Yeah, that was my understanding, mid-March. Still, that was reduced hours, like before.
I have been hearing a lot from constituents that really miss their library time and, those facilities and the ability to get online, both adults and children for telework, telecommuting, doing school activities, and also telehealth. I just wish that the library board would reopen the library as soon as possible.
Patrons can make appointments to come inside and use the computers right now, and they have been doing that. So if those constituents are not aware of that, we can let them know.
Yeah, I was under the impression that they were only open for pickup.
No, that's not correct. It is closed, but if you make an advance appointment, you can come in and use the computers.
Okay, very good to know. Free shed, is there any development on when the free shed, or if the free shed will be opening?
Not that I'm aware of. No, there are no developments that I'm aware of.
So are we waiting for the demolition of the pit before that happens?
I think there are a lot of issues. Obviously, the pandemic is one. The current location is problematic. So I'm strategizing on how to resolve that relative to the traffic flow.
And the other thing was, after last month's meeting, I did get in touch with Michelle Summers, the zoning administrator, and she sent me some figures regarding Airbnbs, and there does seem to be a trend that most of our Airbnbs are for 4 people and fewer, and for 2 cars and fewer. And so, is this board interested in pursuing an application type process for straightforward Airbnbs of that nature and scale, and then having something more robust review process in place for more than 4 people and 2 cars? Or do we want to continue to put everything, through the processes as they are now? I would say a lot of the other counties I looked at, if it's a simple 4 people or fewer spending the night and 2 cars or less, it's just as impactful as if people are living there, and it seems to be a by right application.
I think it's a good idea. I mentioned the one application the other night with the road standard problem, but I think that's something that our zoning administrator would catch as part of her review. If it was that kind of smaller scale tourist home, I think it would free up the planning commission significantly to not, some of these are road, right? They meet the minimum acreage, neighbors don't mind, don't care, nobody expresses any opinion about it, but yet we talk. So I think it would be, I think it's a good idea, Ms. Smith, for administrative efficiency. I have no objection, I support it. So.
Add 2 quick things to that. One, you would probably not want it to apply to new construction, people building a spec building just for the purpose of a tourist home. And then 2, following the last planning commission meeting and recognizing that the new ordinance was not very well known, I worked with Michelle and asked her to develop a new form for our application that applicants must review and sign that enumerates the new code and all of those sections. And so if you submit an application, you're certifying that you've recognized and submitted all these things that are required. And if you don't, we're just going to hand it back to you.
Well, some of the sample applications that I looked at from other localities include questions like, do you own or rent your home? Do you have a shared entrance? That sort of thing. So I think if you develop the application correctly, that you'll screen out a lot of the problem applications, which would still go through the normal channels. And you could just do an easy application, send a letter out to the neighbors, and then if there's no objections, just administer it with staff approval.
This was discussed by the Planning Commission last year, and I think there was a split on during the May Amendment work, and I think ultimately it was decided, let's get the May Amendments done, and there wasn't enough consensus to move that point forward. But if the board signals to the Planning Commission it's what you want, then they're tasked with figuring out what those administrative guidelines should be, just like this short tower thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think the concern was that if it was just an application, that the neighbors would be left out of the communication. But if there's still letters being sent to the neighbors, and then the neighbors don't complain, then they would still have an opportunity to provide feedback. That's all I have.
Mr. Frazier?
I don't have anything to add.
Mr. Parrish?
That means I gotta wake up?
Yes, sir.
No, nothing.
Short timer. I attended by Zoom the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission, and the one thing that they talked about that I know nothing about as far as what Rappahannock would like to do is the possibility of a cigarette tax to create a regional board. So basically, somebody does it for you and ultimately sends you whatever percentage of the tax goes to your county. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
Well, I informed the board several months ago that the General Assembly changed the law and allowed the board to levy a cigarette tax. At that time, the board basically said you didn't want anything to do with it. I suggested, kind of on the exit of that conversation, that, well, maybe we should see what our neighbors do, because it wouldn't be a market driver for our businesses if everybody else does it, and maybe some free money. A regional tax is absolutely, if you are of a mind to do it, you have to do it regionally. We wouldn't want to have our staff trying to figure out stamps for cigarette packs, all that. You do it through a regional entity, and the recent law change this year and I think it ended up dying, requires a regional approach. So if the cigarette tax is something the board wants to pursue, I know there were discussions about would the regional commission possibly do it? Would we jump in with another region? Most other localities look like counties. Appears though they're interested in trying to get this extra revenue. That wasn't what this board said previously.
It does, I do get the feeling that the surrounding counties are going to do something. It sounds like Fauquier is in a northern regional board.
The Northern Virginia area already could tax cigarettes, and they have their own regional board, and so they've invited Fauquier to join them, although Fauquier has said that they would be happy to do something with our region if our region wanted to do something.
Yeah. So.
I'm not preparing any ordinances to tax cigarettes at this point based on my prior conversations with this board, but I wouldn't shut the opportunity for
I
a
haven't
regional.
smoked a cigarette in over 40 years, but I wouldn't want to put a tax on it because any burden we place on our local businesses that sell gas and sundry items when people stop, I mean, small businesses are dying right now.
All right, moving to the item K, closed meeting.
I just wanted to find out too, for matters presented by the board, I just wanted to go back to our earlier discussion for staff focus and prioritization. So what's going to happen as a result of our discussion tonight?
I think what I'd like to see happen is a list of the priorities in a...
You mean the matters presented by the board?
I mean, I guess I just want to circle back to that because we're in matters presented by the board and that was presented tonight. But I guess it was nice we talked about it, but what's going to happen?
You're talking about the prioritization, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I would like to work with Mr. Curry on putting together a more official list of the items that this board believes we should be focused on and work with him with regards to any timing or needs that he may have to be able to complete these tasks in a timely manner. Obviously, buildings take a long time. Emergency services coordinator, not as long. So do some sort of timeline for the projects that would set some sort of expectations. And that way, if we have something from the board or an emergency, we can take it to Mr. Curry and say, okay, on this list of 5 or 6 items that you have, what can we put on the back burner to get this emergency done? And I just think it really helps him understand what kind of staff he needs and any assistance. One of the things that I keep talking about, and people seem to like the idea, is a grant writer, but we don't have anybody that's got the time on the staff to be searching for monies that are out there and writing grants. So I'm just trying to help Mr. Curry in prioritization for him and his staff.
And then I guess my other point of the question is, you know, things come up like at the Public Safety Committee last week, something just sort of came up out of the blue and there had to be a staff pivot immediately from what I would tell to address that concern. So when there is a need for staff to pivot like that and address an immediate concern, how is that going to work?
I think he's been doing that for a couple of years, but I would like for his either mid-month or end-of-month report that he gives us, he can now be able to say, these were the projects I was working on. Public Safety Committee had me go far right, and so he had to work on that and take other people off of the job that they were working on and keeping us in the loop as to what is being accomplished and what maybe had to get put on the back burner for a while.
I don't think the Public Safety Committee tasked him with anything.
I don't either. I thought that's what you just said, that they
No,
had something come up.
something came up as a result of it, and
Right.
and he had to interact with a lot of other people, but the Public Safety didn't task him with anything. So I just want to know, if are we asking staff to to answer to certain people, and if so, what are we putting in place? And I think we should, maybe have some hours for FaceTime with the county administrator, each of us on a monthly basis. Or the option of an hour of FaceTime a month with the county administrator. If we have something from one of our constituents that's of a concern.
I welcome any and all of you into my office at any time you want.
Yeah, well, I never want to do that.
I did ask the other day for a meeting, that would have taken an hour to address a constituent concern. And I was told that you don't have time, which I do understand. But then on the other hand, it's frustrating if I can't sit down and address with staff a concern that a citizen has.
That matter was a zoning matter, and it needs to be dealt with by the zoning administrator. And if the zoning administrator is incapable of handling that, then we'll find another zoning administrator. But I don't know that that's necessary now, but she and I both don't need to handle it.
Okay, well, I did go back to her and get it scheduled, so I do appreciate that. But, it would be nice to understand what we're shooting for here.
Anytime I've ever had any concerns, Mr. Curry's always been available on a moment's notice, so.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
I believe I had a conversation with Mr. Whitson last night in my office at 5 o'clock or something.
Yep.
Well, over the phone.
All right, moving forward to the closed meeting. Okay. I don't know who asked for.
I can make that motion to go into a closed meeting.
I prefer the motion to be very clearly stated, and there is a written document in board docs for you if you would like.
Yeah, I see it. I'd like to make sure, I received a correspondence today, and I want to make sure that performance of board appointee, that we talk about one or more specific individuals without discussing who they are in public.
Do you want to put an S on the end of appointee?
Appointees, yes, sir.
Could you read that into the record, just so everybody knows what we're talking about?
The subject matter of the closed meeting will be performance of a board appointee, performance of board appointees. I have to take the A out.
And the purpose is the discussion, consideration, or reviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries.
I was going to read that, but I thought we were talking about the modification.
No, just read the whole motion that you want to make, and we'll note it for the record, and I will identify who moved, second, and vote.
I move that the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors conduct a closed meeting in accordance with 2.2-3711A of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of, 1, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body. 2.2-3711A1. The subject matter of the closed meeting will be performance of board appointees. That's my motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, this is a roll call.
I guess I do have one thing to say. I know that there's always some reluctance from the other board members to go into closed session to discuss things. But I really do believe at the end of the day, if we don't go into closed session and discuss these things as they should be discussed and work through them as a board, at the end of the day, if we don't do the work, things will only get worse. And so I would hope we would all be of a mind to go into closed session and work together.
All right, Mr. Whitson.
Aye.
Mr. Parrish.
Aye.
Mr. Frazier.
Aye.
Ms. Smith.
Aye.
And I also.